The metal tool slipped from Jake Morrison's calloused hands as orange flames erupted through the building's lobby. Smoke billowed from the elevator shafts of Whitmore Insurance headquarters, filling the marble atrium with a suffocating haze. Through the thickening cloud, Jake could see Eleanor trapped behind the glass doors of the executive suite, James Whitmore pressing a gun against her temple, his face twisted with rage. Blood trickled down Jake's forehead from where debris had struck him moments earlier. His lungs burned, each breath a struggle, as he assessed the rapidly deteriorating situation. Outside, sirens wailed, help coming, but too far away to matter. Jake clutched the crumpled letter in his hand, the last words of Captain Robert Sterling smudged with ash and sweat. Sometimes the bravest person isn't the one who feels no fear, the captain had written. It's the one who knows fear intimately and moves forward anyway. Jake took a deep breath of toxic air and made his decision. 6 months earlier, the apartment kitchen was cramped but spotless, morning sunlight struggling through the single window over the sink. Jake Morrison flipped pancakes on a well-worn skillet, his movements practiced and efficient despite the early hour. At 34, his face carried the weathered lines of someone who'd faced more hardship than his years suggested, but his eyes remained kind. "Daddy, you're making them too big again." Emma's voice carried from the small kitchen table where she sat surrounded by school books, her dark hair pulled back in a slightly lopsided ponytail. At 7 years old, she had her mother's delicate features and her father's determined expression. Too big? These are perfectly engineered pancakes, designed by a certified pancake professional. Jake slid the spatula under his creation with exaggerated precision. Besides, growing ballerinas need extra-large pancakes. It's a scientific fact. Emma giggled, momentarily distracted from the math homework spread before her. That's not a real fact. Miss Jenkins says we should always verify our sources. Well, Miss Jenkins hasn't seen your arabesque, clearly improving at a rate that demands premium pancake fuel. Jake set the plate in front of his daughter, pausing to adjust her ponytail. Sarah had been the expert at hair, another skill he'd been forced to learn through YouTube tutorials and patient practice. As Emma ate, Jake glanced at the calendar hanging beside the refrigerator, red circles highlighting payment due dates that were coming too quickly before the next paycheck. The heating bill was already 2 weeks overdue, and Emma's dance tuition would be due by Friday. His morning plumbing job would cover the rent, but not much else. "Daddy, will you help me practice my solo after school? The recital's in 3 weeks, and I still can't get the turn sequence right." Jake's eyes drifted to the framed photograph on the wall, Sarah in her hospital scrubs, smiling widely, her arm around a younger Jake in his firefighter uniform. 5 years gone, but the absence still felt like a physical ache some days. "Absolutely, Princess. I've been working on my pirouettes. Prepare to be amazed." "You're silly." Emma hesitated, her fork tracing patterns in the syrup. "Kayla's mom is making her costume for the recital. She said she could help make mine too, but..." "But what, Em?" "But I told her my dad was already making an amazing one." Her eyes didn't quite meet his. "I'm sorry. I just didn't want her to think..." "Hey." Jake knelt beside her chair. "That's not a problem. We'll make the best costume the dance school has ever seen. Your old man might not have a sewing machine, but I've got a glue gun and determination." Relief washed over Emma's face. "Really? You're not mad?" "Never. Now finish up or we'll be late. I've got to get you to school before my job at the Petersons' house." Jake ruffled her hair, then turned away to hide the momentary flash of worry. Another expense, another challenge. But Emma's smile was worth figuring it out somehow. As he packed Emma's lunch, Jake's phone buzzed with a text from his former station chief. A position was opening at the fire academy, teaching, not active duty, compatible with his injury. The fifth such message in 3 years. Each time Jake had let the opportunity pass, convinced his background wouldn't be enough without the college degree he'd never had time or money to pursue. But maybe this time. Across town, the Whitmore Insurance headquarters rose 40 stories of glass and steel against the morning sky. On the top floor, Eleanor Whitmore stood at the window of her corner office, the city spread beneath her like a living map. At 38, she projected the polished precision expected of a CEO, tailored charcoal suit, subtle jewelry, not a strand of her dark hair out of place. The quarterly projections are on your desk, along with a risk assessment report for the Cornerstone contractor situation. Lauren Harper, Eleanor's executive assistant, placed a steaming cup of coffee on the desk. The board is concerned about potential liability exposure. Eleanor turned from the window, her expression revealing nothing. How concerned? Mr. Chambers called twice this morning. He's suggesting we delay the safety inspection initiative until legal can fully assess the financial implications. Of course he is. Eleanor took a sip of coffee, perfectly prepared to her specifications. Because warning homeowners about potential fire hazards might impact shareholder value. Lauren's eyebrows rose slightly at the uncharacteristic sarcasm. There's also the charity gala this evening. The Children's Hospital is expecting you to present the donation check. Eleanor suppressed a sigh. Another evening of meaningless talk and strategic networking while wearing uncomfortable shoes. Confirm my attendance, 30 minutes maximum. And the Peterson meeting at 3? Reschedule. I want to review the Cornerstone files personally before the board call tomorrow. Eleanor settled behind her desk, already scanning the risk assessment document. How many properties are potentially affected? Initial estimates suggest over 300 residential buildings and at least 70 commercial structures. Lauren hesitated. If the wiring issues are as widespread as the preliminary report indicates, people could die. Eleanor finished the thought, a momentary crack in her professional veneer. Schedule a call with the inspection team. I want verification protocols in place immediately. As Lauren left, Eleanor opened her desk drawer, eyes falling on the only personal item in her meticulously organized office. A silver-framed photograph of herself in graduation robes, standing beside a distinguished older man in a fire captain's dress uniform. Robert Sterling's proud smile had been captured forever in that moment, 12 years before his death fighting a warehouse fire. She closed the drawer quickly, returning to the Cornerstone file. The company had been cutting corners on electrical work for years. The question was whether Whitmore Insurance had been negligent in identifying the pattern before issuing policies. The potential liability was staggering. Eleanor's intercom buzzed. Ms. Whitmore, Victor Hayes from Risk Management is requesting a moment. Send him in. Victor Hayes entered with the confident stride of a man accustomed to being heard. At 47, his carefully maintained physique and expensive suit projected success, though he'd been passed over for department head when Eleanor brought in an outside expert last year. I've reviewed the Cornerstone situation. Hayes placed a folder on her desk without waiting for an invitation. I believe we're overreacting to limited data. 3 separate inspections found substandard wiring, Victor. In 3 properties out of hundreds, hardly a pattern that justifies a company-wide alert that could trigger panic and lawsuits. Hayes leaned forward slightly. The smarter play is to handle complaints as they arise, quietly and individually. Eleanor studied him, noting the slight tension around his eyes. Even if that means people remain in homes with potential fire hazards. Our responsibility is to this company and its shareholders. Hayes' smile didn't reach his eyes. I thought we shared that priority. Thank you for your input. Eleanor's tone made it clear the discussion was over. I'll take it under advisement. After Hayes left, Eleanor returned to the window, watching the city below with unseeing eyes. When had she become someone who had to be reminded about human lives in the risk assessment equation? What would her father think of the woman she'd become? The memory of Eleanor Whitmore's dismissive gaze had haunted Jake for 6 months. He sat in his truck outside the employment office, remembering how he'd worn his only good suit to the interview at Whitmore Insurance, a position in facilities management that would have meant regular hours, benefits, stability for Emma. He'd spent weeks preparing, taking online courses, practicing answers to potential questions. The reality had been 12 excruciating minutes of Eleanor Whitmore barely glancing at his application, her fingers never stopping their dance across her keyboard. Mr. Morrison, our company requires a certain caliber of professional, she had said, her voice crisp and efficient. Someone with extensive experience in corporate environments, advanced degrees, proven leadership in complex financial sectors. Each word had landed like a small, precise cut. Your background in manual labor, while I'm sure respectable in its own way, simply doesn't align with our standards. He'd sat there, the weight of his inadequacy crushing the practice responses he'd never got to deliver. He'd wanted to tell her about the certifications he'd earned working nights after 12-hour shifts, about the business courses he'd completed online while Emma slept, about his determination to provide something better than their paycheck-to-paycheck existence. Instead, he'd thanked her politely for her time, dignity the only thing he'd managed to salvage. Now, 6 months later, Jake pulled himself from the memory and headed into the employment office. 2 more applications, 2 more chances at something better. The constant hustle of multiple part-time jobs was wearing him down, but giving up wasn't an option. Not with Emma counting on him. His phone rang as he reached the building, unknown number, but Jake answered anyway. He couldn't afford to miss potential work. Jake Morrison. Mr. Morrison, this is Whitmore Estate Management. We have an emergency plumbing situation at the Whitmore residence. Water damage threatening the electrical system needs immediate attention. Jake froze, the name triggering an immediate response. Whitmore? As in Eleanor Whitmore? Yes, Ms. Whitmore's personal residence. You're on our approved emergency contractor list. Can you respond within the hour? The standard emergency rate applies, plus materials. Jake hesitated only briefly. The emergency rate would cover Emma's costume materials, with enough left over to put something toward the heating bill. Personal feelings couldn't matter when opportunity knocked. Text me the address. I'll be there within the hour. Damn. Emma's disappointed face when Jake explained he had to work that evening was almost enough to make him reconsider. But you promised to help with fractions, she said, lower lip trembling slightly, and practice my solo. I know, sweetheart. Jake knelt to her level, the familiar guilt settling in his chest. Mrs. Patterson will stay with you until I get back. This is just a quick job, but it pays really well. Enough for your costume, materials, and maybe even ice cream this weekend. Emma's expression brightened slightly at the mention of ice cream, but her eyes remained worried. Promise you'll be back to check my homework? Pinky promise. Jake linked his little finger with hers, and I'll help with those fractions as soon as I get home, no matter how late. After settling Emma with their elderly neighbor, Jake loaded his tools into the truck and headed toward the address he'd been given. The GPS led him away from the familiar streets of his neighborhood, through increasingly affluent areas, until he reached an imposing set of iron gates at the end of a tree-lined drive. The Whitmore estate was exactly as he'd imagined. Sprawling grounds surrounding a mansion that looked like it belonged in a different century. Pristine white columns flanked the entrance, windows glowing warmly against the darkening evening sky. Jake parked his battered truck beside a manicured hedge, feeling immediately out of place. A house manager met him at the service entrance, quickly explaining the situation. Water leaking into the electrical room in the basement, potentially dangerous if not addressed immediately. Jake followed him through the mansion's ground floor, trying not to stare at artwork that probably cost more than his annual income. The basement was a maze of ancient pipes and modern systems coexisting uneasily. Jake located the source of the leak quickly, a corroded section of copper piping that had finally given way after decades of service. The real concern was the water's proximity to the main electrical panel. This is more serious than I thought, Jake called to the house manager, who hovered nervously at the basement stairs. The water's dangerously close to the electrical room. You should consider shutting off power to this section until I can complete the repair. Ms. Whitmore is working in her home office. She specifically requested no interruptions to the power. The manager checked his watch. How long will the repair take? At least 2 hours to do it properly. Jake examined the pipes more closely, noticing something odd about the electrical conduit running alongside. Has anyone worked on the electrical system recently? Not that I'm aware of. Why? Jake pointed to the conduit. This looks like it's been tampered with. See how the protective coating is stripped away soon, and these wires are exposed? That's not normal wear and tear. The manager frowned. Should I inform Ms. Whitmore? Definitely. This could be a serious safety issue. Jake turned back to the pipes, already planning the repair sequence. I'll start on the water issue first, but someone should look at this electrical work as soon as possible. As the manager headed upstairs, Jake began working on the leaking pipe. The basement was eerily quiet except for the steady drip of water and the occasional creak of the old house settling. He couldn't help wondering what it would be like to live in a place like this, so different from the cramped apartment he shared with Emma. 20 minutes into the repair, the lights flickered once, twice, then died completely, plunging the basement into darkness. In the sudden silence, Jake heard the distinctive sound of electrical discharge, followed by the unmistakable whoosh of flames finding fuel. No, no, no. Jake fumbled for his flashlight, heart pounding as the acrid smell of smoke reached him. Years of firefighter training kicked in automatically. Stay low, find an exit, assess the situation. As he made his way toward the stairs, a sound froze him in place. From somewhere above came a woman's scream, high-pitched with panic and unmistakably familiar. Eleanor Whitmore was trapped somewhere upstairs, and from the rapidly increasing smell of smoke, she didn't have long. For a moment, Jake stood motionless at the base of the stairs, the rational part of his mind cataloging the dangers. The fire was spreading quickly. The old wooden structure of the house was already compromised. Every instinct told him to get outside, call the fire department, save himself. After all, what did he owe Eleanor Whitmore? She'd made it crystal clear that his life, his struggles, his hopes meant nothing to her. But there was another voice in Jake's head, quieter but more insistent. It sounded like Sarah reminding him of the man she'd fallen in love with. It sounded like Emma asking why Daddy's eyes looked so sad after that job interview. Most of all, it sounded like his own conscience. The part of him that had run into burning buildings for 8 years before a falling beam had ended his firefighting career and left him with a permanent limp. Jake took the stairs 2 at a time, his work boots finding purchase on the polished step even as heat pressed against his face like an open furnace. The choice had been made. Whatever happened next, he wouldn't leave anyone behind in the flames, not even Eleanor Whitmore. I've completed the hook and setup section for Second Chance Flames. The piece is 1,998 words total and follows the narrative prose format as requested, with dialogue integrated directly into the text without character attribution tags or technical directions. The hook opens with Jake in a life-threatening situation at Whitmore Insurance headquarters, facing flames and Eleanor held at gunpoint by James Whitmore. This flash-forward creates immediate tension before jumping back 6 months to establish the character's situations. The setup introduces Jake Morrison, struggling single father, former firefighter with an injury, working multiple jobs to support his daughter Emma. Emma, 7-year-old aspiring ballerina who misses her mother but has a close bond with her father. Eleanor Whitmore, cold, efficient, CEO disconnected from human concerns, with hints of a connection to fire captain Robert Sterling. Victor Hayes, potential antagonist with questionable priorities regarding safety versus profit. I've maintained the economic contrast between Jake's modest apartment and Eleanor's luxurious world, established their initial negative interaction through the job interview flashback, and set up the emergency plumbing call that brings Jake to Eleanor's mansion just as fire breaks out. Second Chance Flames Part 2. The second-floor hallway was a tunnel of smoke and flickering orange light, visibility reduced to mere feet. Jake stayed low, his old firefighter training guiding his movements as he navigated through the thickening haze. The heat was building rapidly, too rapidly for a normal electrical fire. Something about this didn't feel right. "Hello? Anyone up here?" Jake called out, his voice barely carrying through the roar of the flames. From somewhere ahead came a response, barely audible. "Help! I'm trapped!" Jake followed the sound, crawling when the smoke became too dense to stand. The elegant hallway that had intimidated him earlier now served as a death trap, its wooden paneling and antique furniture providing perfect fuel for the spreading fire. He passed oil paintings whose subjects seemed to watch accusingly through the haze, generations of Whitmores bearing witness to the destruction of their legacy. The voice called again, stronger this time. "In here! The door's jammed!" Jake recognized it now, the same commanding tone that had dismissed him 6 months earlier, though the authority was now edged with fear. He reached a heavy oak door at the end of the hall, its frame warped from the heat. Through the gap at the bottom, he could see movement inside the room. "Ms. Whitmore, it's Jake Morrison, the plumber." He pressed his hand against the door, feeling the heat. Not yet too hot to touch. The fire hadn't reached this room. "Stand back from the door." Jake positioned himself carefully, favoring his good leg as he prepared to break through. It took 3 attempts, each impact sending jolts of pain through his old injury, before the door finally splintered open. Eleanor Whitmore stood pressed against the far wall of her home office, her usually perfect appearance in disarray. Her expensive business suit was torn at the shoulder, her carefully styled hair hanging loose around her face. But it was her eyes that struck Jake most, wide with fear, yes, but also with something that looked almost like recognition, not just of his face but of the magnitude of what he was doing. The maintenance man? Confusion momentarily replaced fear. What are you— "Oh, time," Jake cut her off, quickly assessing the room. Smoke was beginning to seep in through the air vents, but the fire hadn't breached the walls yet. "We need to get out now. The whole east wing is burning." Eleanor gestured to the window behind her desk. "I tried to open it, but it's stuck. I've been calling 911, but the signal keeps dropping." Jake crossed the room in 3 strides, examining the old-fashioned window mechanism. Years of paint and weather had sealed the frame tight. These old windows are always trouble. He grabbed a heavy paperweight from her desk and wrapped it in his jacket. "Stand back." With a sharp blow, he cracked the glass, then used the protected fabric to clear away the sharp edges. The fresh air that rushed in brought momentary relief, but Jake knew it would only feed the fire approaching from the hallway. "It's about 15 feet down, but there's a hedge below that should break your fall." He leaned out, calculating the safest landing spot. "I'll go first, then help catch you." "No," Eleanor's voice was firm despite her fear. "You go. You've done enough. You shouldn't even be here. I'll follow." Jake shook his head, recognizing the stubborn pride. "With all due respect, Mr. Whitmore, this isn't a negotiation. I've got experience with this sort of thing." Before she could argue further, smoke began pouring in through the vents with new intensity. The decision was made for them. "Fine, you first, then I follow immediately." Eleanor moved to the window, her face pale but determined. Jake nodded, swung his legs over the sill, and with one last look at Eleanor, dropped into the darkness. The impact was harder than he'd anticipated, his bad leg buckling as he tumbled into the hedge. Pain shot through his knee, but he forced himself up, positioning himself beneath the window. "Come now," he called up. "I'll help break your fall." Eleanor appeared at the window, silhouetted against the orange glow now visible in the room behind her. For a moment she hesitated, the CEO who controlled everything facing a situation beyond her command. Then, with surprising grace, she climbed onto the sill and jumped. Jake caught her as best he could, both of them tumbling back into the hedge. For a moment they lay there, Eleanor half across Jake's chest, both breathing heavily, the absurdity of their situation overwhelming. Here was the woman who had dismissed him without a second thought 6 months ago, now literally in his arms. Eleanor recovered first, disentangling herself and standing with as much dignity as the situation allowed. "Thank you," she said, the words coming with visible effort. Before Jake could respond, a window on the 3rd floor exploded outward, showering glass across the lawn. The fire was spreading faster than should be possible. "We need to get further back," Jake said, helping Eleanor away from the building. "The fire department should be here soon." They retreated to the circular driveway at the front of the property, watching as flames consumed the east wing of the mansion. In the distance, sirens wailed, growing closer. "This doesn't make sense," Eleanor said, arms wrapped around herself against the night chill. "The house has state-of-the-art safety systems. How could a small electrical issue cause this?" Jake's mind was working through the same question. "It couldn't, not normally. I noticed something strange about the electrical conduit in the basement. Signs of tampering. This might not have been an accident." Eleanor turned to him sharply. "You think someone did this deliberately?" "I can't be sure without a proper investigation, but yeah, that's my gut feeling." Jake watched the flames with a professional eye. The fire spread too quickly, followed unusual patterns, almost like it had help. Eleanor's face hardened, the vulnerable woman who had jumped from the window replaced by the CEO calculating threats and responses. Who would do such a thing? And why? "That's a question for the police." Jake's phone buzzed in his pocket. "Mrs. Patterson checking on his whereabouts, no doubt worried about Emma. I should call my neighbor. She's watching my daughter." As Jake stepped away to make the call, Eleanor studied him with new interest. The plumber had shown unexpected courage. racing into a burning building to save someone who had treated him with contempt. More intriguingly, he spoke about the fire with unusual knowledge, assessing its patterns and potential causes with professional confidence. When Jake returned, Eleanor was directing the first arriving firefighters, providing information about the house layout and possible spread of the fire. Despite her disheveled appearance, she had resumed full command of the situation, her voice carrying the natural authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "The East Wing is a total loss," she told Jake as he rejoined her. "They're focusing on containing the spread to the rest of the house." Jake nodded, watching the firefighters work with a familiar ache. This had been his world once. The controlled chaos, the teamwork, the purpose that came with saving lives and property. Now he stood on the sidelines, an observer rather than a participant. "You were a firefighter." Eleanor's statement, not a question, cut through his thoughts. Jake turned to her, surprised. "How did you know?" "The way you moved through the house, how you assessed the window escape, your analysis of the fire pattern." Eleanor's gaze was direct, assessing. No plumber has that kind of training or instinct. For a moment, Jake considered deflection, but there seemed little point in hiding the truth now. 8 years with the department, until this happened. He gestured to his leg, which was throbbing painfully from the exertion and the fall. "Beam collapsed during a warehouse fire, crushed my knee, ended my career." Eleanor's expression shifted subtly. "Yet you ran into a burning building tonight." "Old habits." Jake shrugged, uncomfortable with her scrutiny. "Look, I should probably get going. My daughter's waiting and I'm not much use here now." "Your daughter, Emma, was it?" Eleanor recalled the name from his employment application, a detail that surprised even her. "Of course you should go to her, but—" She hesitated, something Eleanor Whitmore rarely did. "I'd like to compensate you properly for what you did tonight." Jake stiffened. "I don't want your money, Miss Whitmore." "I wasn't offering charity," she replied, her tone cooling. "You provided an emergency service at considerable personal risk. That merits compensation." Before Jake could respond, a man approached them, his weathered face serious beneath a fire chief's helmet. "Ms. Whitmore, I'm Chief Martinez. We've contained the fire to the East Wing, but I have some concerns about how it started." "This is Jake Morrison," Eleanor said, gesturing to Jake. "He was working in the basement when the fire broke out and noticed signs of tampering with the electrical system." The chief turned to Jake with renewed interest. "Morrison, wait, Jake Morrison from Station 12, Captain Sterling's protege?" Jake nodded, surprised at being recognized. "Yes, sir, that was a lifetime ago." "Not to the department, it wasn't. Sterling always said you were the best he ever trained." The chief shook Jake's hand with genuine respect. "I'd appreciate your insights on what you saw down there." As Jake described the unusual conduit damage and the fire's suspicious spread pattern, he felt Eleanor watching him intently. The revelation of his firefighting background had clearly altered her perception, though whether that benefited him remained to be seen. When he finished, Chief Martinez nodded grimly. "I'm calling in the arson investigation unit. This doesn't sound like an accident to me." He turned to Eleanor. "Ms. Whitmore, do you know of anyone who might wish you harm?" Eleanor's laugh held no humor. "I'm the CEO of an insurance company that regularly denies claims. The list of people who might wish me ill is longer than I'd care to admit. All the same, you should compile names of anyone with specific grievances or threats." The chief handed her a card. "The investigator will want to speak with both of you tomorrow." After the chief left, an uncomfortable silence fell between Jake and Eleanor. The adrenaline that had carried them through the emergency was fading, leaving exhaustion and awkwardness in its wake. "Your truck is still here?" Eleanor finally asked. Jake nodded. "Unless it's been barbecued. I can have my driver take you home." "Thanks, but I'm good." Jake checked his watch, nearly midnight. Emma would be worried despite Mrs. Patterson's reassurances. "I should really get going." "Mr. Morrison," Eleanor's voice stopped him as he turned to leave. "I owe you my life. That's not a debt I take lightly." Jake met her gaze, seeing genuine gratitude beneath the composed exterior. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Eleanor said simply. "They wouldn't have. Not for me, and certainly not after how I treated you during your interview." The acknowledgement surprised him. He hadn't expected Eleanor Whitmore to remember their brief encounter. much less recognize her behavior as problematic. "Why did you do it?" she asked, the question hanging between them like smoke. "Why risk your life for someone who dismissed you without a second thought?" Jake considered his answer carefully, aware that his response might reveal more about himself than he intended. "Because it was the right thing to do. That's all." Eleanor studied him for a long moment, as if seeing him truly for the first time. "I misjudged you, Mr. Morrison, completely and inexcusably." The admission, clearly difficult for someone of Eleanor's pride, shifted something in the air between them. Not forgiveness exactly, but acknowledgement, a foundation upon which something new might be built. "Get home to your daughter," Eleanor said softly. "The investigator will contact you tomorrow." Jake nodded, turning away from the burning mansion and the woman whose life he'd saved. As he limped toward his truck, now safely distant from the flames, he felt the weight of Eleanor's gaze following him across the darkened lawn. The arson investigator arrived at Jake's apartment the next morning just as he was preparing Emma's lunch for school. Daniel Mercer was in his 60s, with salt and pepper hair and the watchful eyes of someone who had spent decades picking through the aftermath of destruction. "Sorry to bother you at home," Mercer said as Jake invited him in, "but Chief Martinez spoke highly of your observations, and I wanted to get your statement while the details were fresh." Emma watched the exchange from the kitchen table, her curiosity evident as she munched her cereal. "Are you a policeman?" she asked Mercer. "Not exactly, sweetheart." Mercer smiled warmly at the girl. "I figure out why fires start." "My daddy used to be a firefighter," Emma informed him proudly. "He saved a lady from a fire last night." "So I heard." Mercer's eyes moved to Jake with new respect. "Quite the hero." Jake shook his head, uncomfortable with the characterization. "I was just in the right place at the wrong time. Emma, finish your breakfast. The bus will be here soon." While Emma returned to her cereal, Jake led Mercer to the small living room. The investigator took in the modest apartment with a careful gaze, noting the firefighter memorabilia on one shelf and the ballet photos on another. "I examined the electrical system at the Whitmore estate this morning," Mercer began, pulling out a tablet with photos. "You were right about the tampering. Someone deliberately cross-connected wires in a way that would eventually cause catastrophic failure, but not immediately." Jake studied the images, his suspicions confirmed. "A delayed trigger, like a time bomb." "Exactly," Mercer swiped to another photo. "Sophisticated work, not your average vandal. This was someone who knew exactly what they were doing, someone with technical expertise and access to the house." "Any suspects yet?" "Mrs. Whitmore is providing a list of people with access to the property, but it's a long list. Maintenance workers, staff, guests, contractors." Mercer fixed Jake with a direct look. "Including you." Jake met his gaze evenly. "I was called there yesterday for the first time. The tampering had been done long before that, weeks, maybe months earlier, based on the corrosion pattern." Mercer nodded, seemingly satisfied. "That matches my preliminary timeline. Still, I need to ask, you have history with Ms. Whitmore?" Jake hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "I interviewed for a position at her company 6 months ago. It didn't go well." "Meaning?" "Meaning she made it very clear someone with my background wasn't welcome in her corporate world." Jake kept his tone neutral, despite the memory's sting. "But if you're asking if I had reason to hold a grudge, the answer is no. I've been rejected for jobs before. It's part of life." Mercer studied him for a moment longer, then nodded. "Chief Martinez vouched for your character. Said Captain Sterling always spoke highly of you." The mention of his former captain sent an unexpected pang through Jake's chest. Captain Sterling was a good man, best I ever served under. "He thought the same of you." Mercer put away his tablet. "One more thing. Ms. Whitmore asked me to give you this." He handed Jake a business card with Eleanor's direct number written on the back. "She'd like to speak with you about a consulting opportunity related to the investigation." Jake stared at the card, caught off guard. "Consulting? I'm a plumber now, not an investigator." "You're also a former firefighter with specialized knowledge who happened to witness critical details of a potential arson." Mercer stood, gathering his things. "Plus you saved her life. That creates a certain bond, whether you want it or not." After seeing Mercer out and putting Emma on the school bus with promises to help with her ballet practice that evening, Jake sat at the kitchen table, turning Eleanor's card over in his hands. The idea of working with her, even temporarily, stirred complicated feelings. Professional interest in the investigation, certainly, but also lingering resentment over their first encounter and an unwelcome admiration for the composure she'd shown during the fire. His phone rang, the plumbing service dispatcher with another job. Jake tucked Eleanor's card into his wallet, pushing the decision aside. Whatever Eleanor Whitmore wanted would have to wait. He had pipes to fix and bills to pay. The hotel suite Eleanor had relocated to after the fire was luxurious but impersonal, lacking the character of her family home. She sat at the desk by the window, staring at her laptop screen without really seeing it. The insurance adjuster's preliminary report estimated damages in the millions. The East Wing, including her home office and the family library with its irreplaceable first editions, was destroyed. The rest of the mansion had suffered extensive smoke and water damage. But it wasn't the material loss that troubled Eleanor most. It was the violation, the knowledge that someone had deliberately targeted her home, patiently planning destruction that could have claimed her life. Her phone chimed with a message from Daniel Mercer. "Delivered your card to Morrison, no commitment yet." Eleanor frowned, tapping her fingers on the desk. Jake Morrison had become an unexpected variable in an already complex equation. His background as a firefighter trained by Captain Sterling added layers of coincidence that her analytical mind struggled to process. What were the odds that the one person called to her house for an emergency repair would be not just any firefighter, but one who had served under her adoptive father? More troubling was her own reaction to him. Eleanor had built her career on quick, accurate assessments of people. She had dismissed Jake Morrison within minutes of meeting him 6 months ago, categorizing him as unworthy of her company's standards. Now she found herself reevaluating that judgment entirely. The man who had run into a burning building to save her showed courage, quick thinking, and professional competence that demanded respect. His refusal of compensation demonstrated pride in principle. Most disconcerting was his simple explanation for his actions, because it was the right thing to do. Eleanor couldn't remember the last time she had made a decision based solely on what was right rather than what was strategic or profitable. Her assistant knocked lightly before entering with a fresh coffee and a stack of messages. "The board is requesting an emergency meeting to discuss the fire and its potential impact on the Cornerstone investigation." Eleanor took the coffee with a nod of thanks. "Schedule it for tomorrow morning, and get me everything we have on Cornerstone contractors. Inspection reports, claims history, policy details. I want to review it all before the meeting." Also, Mr. Hayes called again. He's insistent about discussing the safety inspection initiative. "Tell him it proceeds as planned." Eleanor's tone left no room for debate. "If anything, the fire at my home demonstrates exactly why we need to be proactive about electrical safety issues." After her assistant left, Eleanor picked up the file Mercer had delivered earlier that morning, Jake Morrison's complete background. His firefighting record was exemplary. Commendations for bravery, specialized training in structural fires, mentor to younger firefighters. The injury that ended his career had occurred while rescuing a trapped child from a collapsing building. The personal details were equally compelling. Widowed at 29 when his wife Sarah, a nurse, was killed by a drunk driver. Single father to Emma, now 7, working multiple jobs to make ends meet while pursuing certifications in online education. Eleanor closed the file, a strange feeling settling in her chest. Had she been anyone else, Jake Morrison would never have hesitated to save her. Yet knowing who she was, how she had treated him, he still risked everything. She picked up her phone and dialed his number, determined to bring him into the investigation. Not just because of his expertise, though that was valuable, but because she needed to understand the kind of person who would run toward danger rather than away from it. The kind of person her father had been, the kind of person she had never managed to become. When the call went to voicemail, Eleanor left a brief message. "Mr. Morrison, this is Eleanor Whitmore. I'd like to discuss a consulting arrangement regarding the investigation into the fire. Please call me at your earliest convenience, and thank you again for everything." She hung up, gazing out at the city skyline. Something had changed the night of the fire, not just in her home, but in her perception. Jake Morrison had saved more than her life. He had shattered assumptions she hadn't even realized she held. The thought was both unsettling and strangely liberating. For the first time in years, Eleanor Whitmore found herself questioning not just a single decision, but the entire framework of values that had guided her life since her father's death. I've completed part 2, the changing event and first twist. The total word count is 3,476 words. This section focuses on 1, the dramatic rescue scene where Jake saves Eleanor from the burning mansion. 2, the discovery that the fire was deliberately set through tampering with the electrical system. And the first major twist, the revelation of Jake's background as a respected firefighter who trained under Captain Sterling, Eleanor's adoptive father. 4, the shifting power dynamic as Eleanor begins to see Jake in a new light and seeks his help with the investigation. The Italian restaurant was small and unassuming, tucked away on a side street far from the corporate high-rises downtown. Jake arrived 5 minutes early, scanning the dimly lit interior before spotting Eleanor at a corner table. Even in casual clothes, dark jeans and a simple blouse rather than her usual power suit, she carried an unmistakable aura of authority. Several patrons glanced her way with the instinctive recognition that someone important was in their midst. Jake made his way to the table, conscious of his worn boots and the faint smell of pipe sealant that clung to his clothes despite his best efforts to clean up after his afternoon job. He debated declining Eleanor's dinner invitation, especially after 3 days of ignoring her calls, but curiosity had finally won out. "Mr. Morrison," Eleanor rose slightly as he approached, gesturing to the chair across from her. "Thank you for coming." "Ms. Whitmore." Jake took the offered seat, noting the single glass of red wine before her. "Sorry about not returning your calls sooner. It's been a busy week." Eleanor nodded, accepting the explanation without comment. "I hope you don't mind the location. I thought somewhere private would be best for our discussion." "It's fine." Jake glanced around the restaurant, appreciating its unpretentious atmosphere. "Though I'm surprised, figured you'd pick somewhere with crystal chandeliers and waiters who speak French." A flicker of amusement crossed Eleanor's face. "I save those for impressing clients. This place has better food." The waiter appeared and Jake ordered a beer, grateful when Eleanor suggested they look at the menu before discussing business. The small talk that followed was surprisingly comfortable. Observations about the unseasonably warm weather, the restaurant's renowned tiramisu, neutral topics that allowed them to adjust to each other's presence outside the context of crisis. After they ordered, Eleanor set aside her menu and met Jake's gaze directly. "I'll get to the point, Mr. Morrison. I'd like to hire you as a consultant on the arson investigation." Jake took a sip of his beer, considering her. "I'm not an investigator, Ms. Whitmore. I fix pipes for a living now. You were a firefighter for 8 years with specialized training in structural fires. You noticed the electrical tampering before anyone else, and you have insight into fire behavior that could be invaluable to the investigation." Eleanor leaned forward slightly. "Daniel Mercer specifically recommended you." "Mercer has a whole team of experts at his disposal, none of whom were there that night, none of whom saw what you saw." Eleanor paused as the waiter delivered their appetizers. When he departed, she continued in a lower voice, "And none of whom I trust the way I trust you." Jake nearly choked on his beer. "Trust me, you don't even know me. I know you ran into a burning building to save someone who had treated you dismissively. I know you refused payment for an act of courage that could have cost you your life." Eleanor's gaze was unwavering. "That tells me a great deal about your character, Mr. Morrison." Jake shifted uncomfortably under her scrutiny. "One decent act doesn't make me trustworthy. For all you know, I could have set the fire myself." "Did you?" "Of course not." "Then we've established that much." Eleanor's lips curved in a slight smile. "Besides, Mercer has thoroughly vetted your whereabouts prior to arriving at my home. You're not a suspect." Jake sighed, realizing she had anticipated and countered his objections. What exactly would this consulting job involve? Reviewing the evidence with Mercer, providing insights based on your firefighting experience, helping identify potential suspects based on the technical knowledge required. Eleanor named a consulting fee that made Jake blink. "The compensation reflects both the importance of the work and the value of your expertise." The amount was more than Jake made in 2 months of plumbing jobs, enough to pay Emma's dance tuition for a year, with plenty left over. Still, he hesitated. I have other commitments. My daughter will work around your schedule, Eleanor said immediately. Evenings, weekends, whatever works for you and Emma. The mention of his daughter's name caught Jake off guard. He'd never discussed Emma during his brief interview at Whitmore Insurance. How do you know my daughter's name? Something flickered across Eleanor's face. Discomfort, perhaps, or embarrassment. I may have reviewed your background more thoroughly this time. You mean you ran a check on me? Yes, Eleanor didn't flinch from the accusation. I needed to know who I was dealing with. Jake should have been angry at the invasion of privacy, but the honesty of her response diffused his irritation. At least she hadn't tried to deny it or offer excuses. Fine, I'll consult on the investigation. He held up a hand as Eleanor began to thank him. On one condition, complete transparency. I want to know everything the investigation uncovers, not just the parts you think are relevant. Eleanor considered him for a moment, then nodded. Agreed. Complete transparency. Their entrees arrived, temporarily pausing the conversation. As they ate, Jake found himself studying Eleanor with new interest. In the soft lighting of the restaurant, away from the corporate setting that usually defined her, she seemed more human somehow, still formidable, but approachable in a way she hadn't been before. You haven't asked about my background check, Eleanor said suddenly. Aren't you curious what I found? Jake shrugged. My life's an open book, not much to find. On the contrary, Eleanor set down her fork. Your service record was exemplary. Multiple commendations for bravery, special recognition for a water rescue in 2017. The injury that ended your career occurred while saving a child from a collapsing structure. She paused. You nearly died that day. Jake's hand tightened around his beer glass, memories flooding back. The cracking timbers, the weight crushing his leg, the small hand clutching his as he shielded the girl with his body. That was a long time ago. Not so long, 4 years. Eleanor's voice softened. Why didn't you mention any of this during your interview? Your background in emergency response would have been relevant to the facility's management position. Would it have mattered? Jake met her gaze directly. You'd already decided I wasn't the caliber of person your company needed. Eleanor had the grace to look uncomfortable. I made a judgment error. One of many, it seems. The admission, unexpected from someone of Eleanor's obvious pride, shifted something in Jake's perception. Perhaps there was more to Eleanor Whitmore than the cold executive who had dismissed him 6 months ago. Tell me about the safety inspection initiative you mentioned to your assistant, Jake said, changing the subject. The one involving Cornerstone contractors. If Eleanor was surprised by his knowledge of her conversation, she didn't show it. We've identified a pattern of substandard electrical work in the properties insured by Whitmore that were built or renovated by Cornerstone. Faulty wiring, improper grounding, code violations. The potential for fires like the one at my home exists in hundreds of buildings, and your board wants to keep it quiet. Eleanor's eyes narrowed slightly. How did you know that? It's what boards always want. Minimize liability, protect shareholder value, handle problems quietly. Jake took another sip of his beer. Meanwhile, families live in homes that could burn down around them. I'm pushing for full disclosure and immediate inspections, Eleanor said, a hint of defensiveness in her tone. Contrary to what you might believe, Mr. Morrison, I do care about more than the bottom line. Jake studied her, sensing the sincerity behind her words. I believe you. The simple statement seemed to catch Eleanor off guard. She blinked, then recovered her composure. The board meeting is tomorrow. I expect resistance, but I intend to proceed with the inspections regardless. That could put your position at risk. A slight smile touched Eleanor's lips. Some things are worth the risk, Mr. Morrison, as you demonstrated rather dramatically at my home. The remainder of dinner passed in surprisingly companionable conversation, focusing on the details of the investigation. Eleanor was impressively well-informed, having already memorized key points from Mercer's preliminary report. Jake found himself appreciating her quick intelligence and the focused way she processed information, the same qualities that had likely propelled her to her current position. As they finished their tiramisu, which was indeed excellent, Eleanor glanced at her watch. I've kept you too long. You probably need to get home to Emma. She's at a sleepover tonight. First one since Jake caught himself, uncomfortable sharing personal details. She's fine. Eleanor nodded, understanding what he hadn't said. The first milestone after loss is always the hardest. For both of you, I imagine. The perceptiveness of her comment surprised him. You sound like you speak from experience. Something shifted in Eleanor's expression, a momentary vulnerability quickly masked. We all have our losses, Mr. Morrison. Before Jake could respond, Eleanor signaled for the check, smoothly moving the conversation back to logistics for their first meeting with Mercer the following afternoon. As they left the restaurant, the evening air was cool against Jake's face, carrying the promise of autumn. Thank you for dinner, Jake said, suddenly awkward now that their business was concluded. And for the opportunity. Eleanor extended her hand formally. Thank you for agreeing to help, despite having every reason not to. Jake took her offered hand, noting the strength in her grip. Everyone deserves a second chance, Miss Whitmore. Even CEOs who make judgment errors. The comment drew a genuine laugh from Eleanor, a warm sound that transformed her face. Indeed, I'll see you tomorrow, Mr. Morrison. As Jake watched her slide into the back of a waiting town car, he realized that his perception of Eleanor Whitmore had shifted fundamentally in the space of a single evening. The woman he had met tonight, thoughtful, determined, even occasionally vulnerable, bore little resemblance to the dismissive executive from his interview. Which version was the real Eleanor Whitmore remained to be seen. The Whitmore Insurance headquarters occupied a gleaming skyscraper downtown, its 40 stories of glass and steel projecting power and permanence. Jake felt distinctly out of place as he crossed the marble-floored lobby, conscious of curious glances from employees who clearly recognized him as an outsider, despite his attempt at business-casual attire. At the security desk, he gave his name to a guard who checked a list before offering a visitor badge. Ms. Whitmore's office is on the top floor. The elevator on the right requires keycard access. Someone will meet you there. The executive elevator moved with silent efficiency, its mirrored walls reflecting Jake's uncomfortable expression back at him. He had spent the morning at Emma's school, volunteering for her class field trip to the Science Museum, and had come directly to the meeting without time to change. His khakis and button-down shirt were respectable enough, but a far cry from the tailored suits worn by everyone he'd seen in the lobby. When the doors opened on the 40th floor, Eleanor herself stood waiting, her expression unreadable. Mr. Morrison, thank you for coming. Jake stepped out, taking in the rarefied atmosphere of the executive floor. Plush carpeting, original artwork on the walls, floor-to-ceiling windows offering spectacular views of the city. Quite a place you've got here. It serves its purpose. Eleanor led him down a hallway lined with glass-walled offices. Mercer is waiting in the conference room. He's brought the evidence collected so far. The conference room was smaller than Jake had expected, clearly designed for focused meetings rather than presentations. Daniel Mercer stood as they entered, nodding to Jake with what seemed like relief. Good to see you, Morrison. I was beginning to think you'd turned us down. The investigator gestured to the materials spread across the table. Photographs, reports, diagrams of the Whitmore estate's electrical system. Had to think about it, Jake admitted, taking a seat across from Mercer. But I'm in now. Eleanor took a chair at the head of the table, immediately shifting the room's energy. Despite the informal setting, her authority was palpable. Mercer, bring us up to speed on the investigation. For the next hour, Mercer walked them through the evidence, methodically building a case for deliberate sabotage. The electrical tampering had been sophisticated, designed to create a catastrophic failure that would appear accidental to casual inspection. Only someone with specialized knowledge could have executed it, and only someone with access to the estate could have placed it. We've compiled a list of everyone who had access to the basement in the 6 months prior to the fire, Mercer said, sliding a document across the table. Maintenance staff, contractors, service providers. It's a long list. Jake reviewed the names, recognizing none. Any stand out as having both motive and the technical expertise? That's where it gets interesting. Mercer pulled up a photo on his tablet, a man in his 40s, well-dressed, with an expression of practiced charm. James Whitmore, Ms. Whitmore's ex-husband. Jake glanced at Eleanor, whose face had gone carefully blank. You were married? Briefly, her tone discouraged further questions. It ended badly. Mercer continued, professional despite the obvious tension. Mr. Whitmore contested the divorce settlement vigorously, particularly regarding ownership of the estate. The property was originally part of his family holdings before being transferred to joint ownership during the marriage. And he has the technical knowledge? Jake asked, studying the photograph more carefully. Gregory Winters, former risk assessment manager at Whitmore Insurance, fired 3 years ago for falsifying inspection reports. He was taking bribes from property developers to overlook code violations. I remember him, Eleanor said grimly. He threatened to expose the company when I terminated him, though there was nothing to expose beyond his own corruption. Would he have access to your home? Jake asked. He attended company events at the estate before his termination, Eleanor confirmed, and he certainly had the inspection background to understand electrical systems. Mercer swiped again, revealing a third man, older with the weathered hands of someone who worked with tools. Marcus Donovan, electrical contractor who worked on renovations at the Whitmore estate 2 years ago. His company lost a major insurance contract with Whitmore 6 months later, nearly bankrupting him. He underbid the project, then tried to cut corners on materials, Eleanor explained. When our inspectors caught it, he became verbally abusive, threatened to make me regret canceling his contract. Jake studied the 3 suspects, each with plausible motive and means. Any physical evidence linking any of them to the scene? Not yet, Mercer admitted. We're still processing the site. The fire destroyed most potential evidence in the area where the tampering occurred. As the discussion continued, Jake found himself drawn to the diagrams of the electrical system, noting details that others might miss. The tampering had been done with precision, knowledge, and patience, the work of someone confident in their abilities, perhaps even proud of their technical skill. There's something else, Jake said, interrupting Mercer's description of the investigation timeline. The way this was done, it's almost like a signature. Too perfect, too precise, like someone showing off their technical expertise. Mercer leaned forward, interested. Leaving a calling card? Exactly, not just malice but pride. Look what I can do that you can't even detect. Jake glanced at Eleanor. That sounds more like professional arrogance than personal vendetta. Eleanor considered this, her analytical mind visibly processing the theory. That would point more toward Donovan or Winters. They both had professional reputations damaged by their association with Whitmore Insurance. But James would be the most obvious suspect, Mercer countered. The bitter ex-husband is always the first person investigators look at. The discussion continued, weighing the relative likelihood of each suspect's involvement, until Eleanor's assistant interrupted with a reminder about the board meeting. Eleanor nodded, her expression shifting back to CEO mode. I need to go, she told them, gathering her materials. But I want both of you at my home tomorrow morning. The insurance adjuster is doing a final assessment, and I'd like your insights on what they might miss. After she left, Mercer gave Jake a speculative look. Interesting dynamic between you two. Jake kept his expression neutral. We have a professional arrangement. Uh-huh. Mercer's tone suggested he wasn't convinced. Just be careful, Morrison. Eleanor Whitmore operates in a different world than folks like us. Always has, even when Captain Sterling was alive. Jake paused, the casual reference catching his attention. You knew Captain Sterling. Worked with him on dozens of investigations over the years. Mercer's expression softened with genuine respect. One of the finest men I've ever known. He had a nose for when something wasn't right. Sounds like you inherited that from him. Jake absorbed this information, a new connection forming. Did you know he had a daughter? Mercer nodded. He adopted her after her parents died. Car accident, I think. He was immensely proud of her, though worried she was working too hard, losing sight of what mattered. He gestured toward the door Eleanor had exited through. She wasn't always like this, you know. The corporate armor, the isolation. Robert's death hit her hard. The revelation settled over Jake like a heavy blanket, bringing with it a complex mix of emotions. Captain Sterling had been his mentor, the man who had guided his early career with wisdom and tough love. The thought that Eleanor was his daughter, that there had been this connection between them all along, was almost too coincidental to believe. She never mentioned he was her father, Jake said, struggling to reconcile this new information with his perception of Eleanor. Eleanor keeps her personal life separate from business. Always has. Mercer gathered his files, preparing to leave. But I'm surprised she hasn't told you, given your history with Robert. Jake left the Whitmore building in a state of confused contemplation, the new knowledge altering his understanding of Eleanor in fundamental ways. Captain Sterling had often spoken of his daughter with pride, though he'd kept his family life largely private from his crew. Jake had never connected the successful businesswoman with the daughter Sterling had mentioned. What would Captain Sterling think of how his daughter had treated Jake during that interview 6 months ago? What would he think of the woman she had become? Brilliant and successful, yes, but also isolated, detached from the human connections that Sterling himself had valued above all else. And why hadn't Eleanor mentioned their connection? Surely she knew of Jake's relationship with her father. It seemed impossible that she wouldn't have recognized his name from Captain Sterling's stories. As Jake drove to pick up Emma from school, his thoughts circled these questions without finding answers. The investigation had just become considerably more complicated, not just professionally but personally. Whatever happened next, his involvement with Eleanor Whitmore could no longer be considered simply a consulting arrangement. The ballet studio was warm and bright, late afternoon sunlight streaming through tall windows that lined one wall. Jake sat on a folding chair in the back, watching Emma practice with her class. Her face was a mask of concentration as she worked through the steps, small body striving for the grace and precision that came naturally to some of the older girls. Pride swelled in Jake's chest as he watched her. Despite everything, losing her mother, their financial struggles, his frequent absences for work, Emma remained resilient and determined. Sarah would have been so proud of the little girl they'd created together. His phone vibrated in his pocket, a text from Mercer with photographs from the insurance adjuster's initial report. Jake scrolled through them, noting details about the fire's spread pattern that confirmed his earlier suspicions about the deliberate nature of the blaze. A soft voice interrupted his concentration. Mr. Such, Morrison? Jake looked up, startled to find Eleanor Whitmore standing beside him, dressed not in her usual business attire but in casual slacks and a simple blouse. Without her usual power suit and the height advantage of her office, she seemed almost approachable. Ms. Whitmore? Jake quickly put away his phone. What are you doing here? The board meeting ended early. I remembered you mentioned Emma had ballet this afternoon. Eleanor glanced toward the practicing children. I hope you don't mind my coming. I wanted to continue our discussion, and my driver was passing this way. Jake doubted very much that Eleanor's usual route took her anywhere near this neighborhood, but he appreciated the attempt at casualness. Which one is Emma? Eleanor asked, her gaze moving over the group of young dancers. Third from the left. Blue leotard, hair in a bun that took me 15 minutes to get right. Eleanor watched as Emma executed a series of small jumps, her face serious with effort. She's good, very focused. Gets that from her mother. Jake smiled slightly. Sarah was the disciplined one. I was always the dreamer. Eleanor settled into the chair beside him, her movements careful, as if uncertain of her welcome. Mercer tells me you have been raising her alone since she was 2. That's right. Jake glanced at her, wondering at this unexpected interest in his personal life. Your background check must have been thorough. It was. Eleanor's gaze remained on the dancing children. I'm sorry about your wife. Losing someone suddenly, it leaves wounds that never quite heal. The personal nature of the observation caught Jake off guard. There was genuine understanding in Eleanor's voice, as if she spoke from experience rather than sympathy. You sound like you know something about that, he said carefully. Eleanor was quiet for a moment, her profile outlined against the window light. My adoptive father, Captain Robert Sterling, died in a warehouse fire downtown 10 years ago. He went in to save a family trapped on the 4th floor. None of them made it out. Jake's breath caught, the confirmation of what Mercer had told him landing with unexpected force. Captain Sterling was your father? Eleanor turned to him then, her eyes searching his face. You knew him. It wasn't a question, but Jake answered anyway. I served under him for 2 years before transferring to a different station. He was the kind of leader who inspired absolute loyalty, The type who led by example and never asked his team to take risks he wouldn't take himself. Something shifted in Eleanor's expression, a softening, a momentary vulnerability. He used to talk about his team constantly. There was one firefighter in particular that he mentioned often, someone who had an instinct for reading fire behavior, who could navigate smoke-filled buildings like he had a built-in compass. She paused, watching Jake closely. Someone who'd saved more lives than anyone could count, including a pregnant woman from a third-floor apartment fire on Elm Street. The memory hit Jake like a physical blow, carrying Mrs. Rodriguez down 3 flights of stairs while her husband screamed from the street below. She'd given birth to a healthy baby girl 2 weeks later, naming her Sarah after Jake's wife. Elm Street, he said softly. Mrs. Rodriguez and her baby. Eleanor nodded, a sad smile touching her lips. Robert called you his best firefighter. He said you had a gift, that you could see solutions where others saw only problems. He said if he ever had to choose someone to trust with his own life, it would be Jake Morrison. The revelation settled over Jake, bringing with it pride at his former captain's assessment, but also a deep sadness for the connection he'd never known existed, for the opportunity lost when Eleanor had dismissed him based on assumptions rather than understanding. I never made the connection, Eleanor continued, her voice barely above a whisper. When you walked into my office 6 months ago, I saw only what I expected to see, someone I'd already categorized and dismissed. I never thought to ask about your background, your experience, your character. She met his gaze directly. I failed not just as a potential employer, but as Robert's daughter. Jake wanted to be angry, to point out how her prejudices had cost him opportunities and dignity. But looking across at Eleanor's obvious remorse, at the way her shoulders carried what seemed like years of accumulated guilt, he found that anger was the last thing he felt. He never mentioned having a daughter, adopted or otherwise, Jake said, surprised by the gentleness in his own voice. Eleanor's smile was sad, transforming her face in ways her corporate mask never had. Robert was intensely private about his personal life. He believed that his team should see him as their captain first, everything else second. She looked down at her hands, elegant fingers twisting together. He adopted me when I was 16, after my parents died in a car accident. He was my father's partner on the police force before joining the fire department. The pieces of the puzzle began falling into place for Jake. Eleanor's drive for success, her rigid standards, her apparent inability to see beyond surface impressions. She'd learned early that life could change in an instant, that security came from building walls high enough to keep uncertainty at bay. He wanted me to follow in his footsteps, Eleanor continued, but I was too afraid. After losing my birth parents so suddenly, the thought of deliberately putting myself in danger every day seemed impossible. So I chose the safest path I could think of. Business school, corporate America, a world where risks could be calculated and managed. There's nothing wrong with choosing safety, Jake said quietly. Your father would have understood that. Eleanor nodded, but her expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. The night he died, he'd been talking about retirement, about wanting to spend more time with family, about being proud of what he'd built, but ready to step back. She looked up, meeting Jake's gaze. He was planning to recommend you for promotion to lieutenant. The information hit Jake harder than he'd expected. Lieutenant Morrison, it would have meant better pay, more stability, a clearer path toward providing Emma with the life he dreamed of giving her. Instead, Captain Sterling's death had coincided with Jake's own injury, and both their futures had taken drastically different turns. I'm sorry, Eleanor said, her voice thick with emotion. I'm sorry you lost your mentor, your career, your opportunities. And I'm sorry that when you came to me for help, I made everything worse instead of honoring what Robert saw in you. Jake reached across the space between them, covering Eleanor's hand with his own. Her skin was soft, unmarked by the kind of physical labor that had defined his adult life, but her grip was surprisingly strong when she held on. We can't change the past, he said gently, but maybe we can do something about the future. Eleanor looked up at him with eyes that held hope and uncertainty in equal measure. What did you have in mind? Before Jake could answer, Eleanor reached into her purse, pulling out a manila envelope, thick and official looking. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed it on his lap. Robert left something for you in his will. I only discovered it yesterday when I was going through his papers, trying to understand why your name seems so familiar." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "I should have given this to you years ago, but I never knew where to find you. And then when you walked into my office..." Jake stared at the envelope, his name written across the front in Captain Sterling's familiar block letters. The handwriting brought back a flood of memories: duty rosters, commendation forms, the encouraging note Robert had left on Jake's locker after his first successful high-rise rescue. "I can't," Jake's voice caught. "This isn't..." "It's yours," Eleanor said simply. "I can't open it. It's not mine to read. But there's also this." She pulled out a smaller envelope, addressed to her in the same handwriting. "He wrote me a letter too, asking me to find you if anything ever happened to him." Her voice dropped, heavy with regret. "I failed him, Jake. I failed you both." With unsteady fingers, Jake opened the larger envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a brief letter dated just 2 weeks before Captain Sterling's death, along with several official documents that made his heart skip. "Jake," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're probably wondering why I left you these papers. The truth is, you're the best firefighter I've ever had the privilege to serve with. And more than that, you are a good man. Sarah always said you deserve more than the risks we take every day could offer, especially with little Emma depending on you." Jake's throat tightened at the mention of his late wife. Captain Sterling had been at Sarah's funeral, had stood quietly in the back while Jake struggled to hold himself together for Emma's sake. "I've recommended you for early pension benefits based on your service record and injury status. The paperwork is included here. It should provide enough monthly income to give you options. Maybe go back to school if you want, or start that contracting business you always talked about. I've also included a recommendation letter for the Fire Academy instructor position that's opening up next year. You have too much knowledge and experience to waste on the sidelines." Jake's hands shook as he examined the documents: pension approvals, instructor recommendations, even a partial scholarship to a business management program at the local community college. All dated 10 years ago, all signed and processed, all somehow lost in the bureaucratic shuffle after Captain Sterling's death. "There's more," Eleanor said softly, reaching into her purse again. This time she produced a small velvet box, the kind that held something precious. "He left this for Emma." Inside the box was a delicate gold locket engraved with the fire department emblem and Emma's initials. A folded note tucked beneath it read, "For Emma Morrison, daughter of a hero, may she always know how proud her father's captain was of the man who raised her." Jake closed his eyes, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had been kept from him for 10 years. The pension alone would have changed everything. No more scraping by paycheck to paycheck. No more watching Emma's face fall when he couldn't afford dance classes or the art supplies she'd wanted. The instructor position would have given him purpose, a way to pass on his knowledge while staying safe for his daughter's sake. "Wait, Jake's voice was barely audible. "Why didn't any of this reach me?" Eleanor pulled out yet another document, this one bearing the letterhead of the fire department's administrative office. "There was a clerical error. Your file was misfiled under your middle name after Robert's death." These documents sat in storage for years, waiting for someone to claim them. No one thought to look. But there was something else in Eleanor's expression, a weight that suggested the story wasn't quite complete. When Jake pressed her gently, she finally revealed the full truth. "My company handles the fire department's benefits administration. Has for the past 8 years. Eleanor's voice was steady despite the obvious difficulty of the confession. "When I took over as CEO 3 years ago, I should have audited the old files. Should have caught the error. Instead, I was so focused on efficiency and cost-cutting that I let it slide. The unclaimed benefits made our numbers look better." The revelation hit Jake like a physical blow. Not only had Eleanor personally denied him a job, but her negligence had cost him years of financial security that had rightfully been his. The irony was almost too bitter to comprehend. The woman he had just risked his life to save had been unwittingly responsible for years of his family's struggle. For a long moment, Jake said nothing, processing the full scope of what had been taken from him. Emma's childhood lived in poverty when it didn't have to be. His own sense of worth eroded by years of rejection and failure. The opportunities lost, the dreams deferred, all because of bureaucratic incompetence and corporate indifference. "I understand if you hate me," Eleanor said finally, her voice thick with emotion. "I understand if you can never forgive what I've done, both deliberately and through negligence. But I want to make it right, Jake. However I can, I want to make it right." Jake looked across at this woman who held so much power over his past and future. This person who had been both his salvation and his destruction. Her face was open now, vulnerable in a way he'd never seen before, stripped of the corporate armor that had defined their previous interactions. "The pension," Jake said finally. "Can it be reinstated?" Eleanor nodded eagerly. "With back payments, 10 years worth, plus interest. It'll take some paperwork, but it's legally yours, always has been." "And the instructor position?" "The current instructor is retiring next month. If you want it, it's yours. The pay is good, the benefits are excellent, and you'd be training the next generation of firefighters." Eleanor's voice softened. "Robert always said you had a gift for teaching." Jake felt something shift inside him, a loosening of the tight knot of resentment and disappointment he'd carried for so long. The practical part of his mind was already calculating. The back pension would eliminate his debts, provide a college fund for Emma, maybe even allow them to move to a better neighborhood. The instructor job would give him purpose and security, a chance to honor Captain Sterling's memory while building a future for his daughter. But there was another part of him, the part that remembered the humiliation of that job interview, that wanted to make Eleanor understand the full cost of her prejudices, not for revenge, but for something more important, genuine change. "There's something else I need," Jake said slowly, "something beyond money or jobs." Eleanor leaned forward, her attention completely focused. "Anything, name it. I need you to understand what it's like to be judged by your appearance, your address, your education instead of your character. To have doors slammed in your face by people who never bothered to see who you really are." Jake's gaze was steady. "I need you to promise me that no one else will go through what I went through in your office." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, the first genuine emotion Jake had seen from her beyond fear and regret. "I promise," she whispered. "I swear to you, Jake, I'll change how we hire, how we evaluate people. No more assumptions, no more prejudice." She took a shaky breath. "Robert would be ashamed of the person I became, but maybe I can still become the person he wanted me to be." Jake nodded, satisfied that her commitment was real. But as they sat there in the quiet ballet studio, surrounded by the ordinary sounds of children learning and growing, he realized that something unexpected was happening. Despite everything, the lost years, the financial hardship, the wounded pride, he was beginning to see Eleanor not as an enemy to be conquered, but as someone who had lost her way and was genuinely trying to find it again. The ballet class ended, children scattering to waiting parents. Emma spotted Jake and raced over, her face flushed with exertion and pride. She skidded to a stop when she noticed Eleanor, curiosity replacing her initial enthusiasm. "Emma, this is Ms. Whitmore," Jake said, placing a gentle hand on his daughter's shoulder. "She knew Captain Sterling, the firefighter I used to work with." Eleanor smiled, a genuine warmth transforming her usually composed features. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Emma. Your father has told me what a wonderful dancer you are." Emma studied Eleanor with the direct, assessing gaze of childhood. "Are you a dancer too?" "No, I'm afraid not. I have two left feet, as my father used to say." Eleanor's smile turned wistful. "But I always wished I could be." "I could show you some steps," Emma offered generously. "They're not that hard once you practice." "I would like that very much." Eleanor glanced at Jake, seeking permission. Jake nodded, something warm and unexpected blooming in his chest as he watched his daughter take Eleanor's hand, already explaining the 5 basic ballet positions with the seriousness of a dedicated teacher. In that moment, watching the CEO of Whitmore Insurance being instructed in plie technique by a 7-year-old in a slightly rumpled leotard, Jake felt the last of his resentment begin to fade. The past couldn't be changed, but the future, that was still unwritten. And for the first time in years, Jake Morrison found himself looking forward rather than back. 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind of change. Jake's life, so long defined by struggle and scarcity, transformed almost overnight. The back pension payments from the fire department arrived, a substantial sum that eliminated his debts and allowed him to move Emma to a better apartment in a neighborhood with parks and a highly rated elementary school. The orientation for his instructor position at the fire academy began, his experience and practical knowledge quickly earning the respect of both colleagues and students. For the first time in years, Jake wasn't living paycheck to paycheck, constantly calculating which bill could be delayed another week. The relief was profound, but equally important was the sense of purpose that came with teaching, passing on knowledge that could save lives, honoring Captain Sterling's faith in him. The investigation into the mansion fire proceeded more slowly. Mercer had identified additional suspects, interviewed potential witnesses, and gathered technical evidence, but no smoking gun had emerged. James Whitmore had an alibi for the night of the fire, though not for the earlier period when the electrical tampering would have occurred. Gregory Winters and Marcus Donovan remained persons of interest, each with compelling motives and the necessary expertise. Throughout these developments, Eleanor had become a regular presence in Jake and Emma's lives. It began with practical matters, helping them navigate the apartment search, explaining the pension reinstatement paperwork, arranging for the fire academy position. But gradually, the interactions had expanded beyond necessity into something resembling friendship. Sunday dinners became a tradition, with Eleanor arriving precisely at 5, always bringing a thoughtful contribution. Fresh bread from an artisanal bakery, a board game Emma had mentioned wanting, once even homemade cookies that she admitted had taken 3 attempts to get right. These glimpses of Eleanor outside her corporate persona fascinated Jake, revealing a woman who approached even baking with determined precision, who could laugh at her own failures, who listened to Emma's school stories with genuine interest. Jake found himself watching Eleanor during these domestic moments, noting how she relaxed incrementally each time, her shoulders losing their rigid set, her expressions becoming more natural. It was like witnessing a person gradually remember how to be human after years of functioning as a corporate entity. On this particular Sunday, Jake stood at the kitchen counter of their new apartment, preparing a roast chicken, while Emma set the table with meticulous care. Their new home was modest by Eleanor's standards, a 2-bedroom apartment in a well-maintained building, but compared to their previous place, it felt palatial. High ceilings, large windows, a small balcony overlooking a tree-lined street, and most importantly, Emma's own room decorated exactly as she wanted, complete with ballet-themed wallpaper and a proper practice bear. "Is Eleanor bringing dessert again?" Emma asked, carefully arranging forks with the serious concentration of a child given an important responsibility. "She mentioned something about a chocolate mousse from that French bakery you liked." Jake smiled at his daughter's barely contained excitement. Emma had taken to Eleanor with surprising speed, drawn perhaps to the feminine presence she'd lacked since Sarah's death, or simply responding to Eleanor's evident respect for her opinions and interests. "She promised to help me with my science project," Emma said, adjusting a napkin to perfect symmetry. "She knows all about climate things because her company has to calculate risks for floods and fires and stuff." Jake nodded, amused by Emma's simplified understanding of insurance actuarial work. "Just don't keep her up too late with your questions. She has that board meeting tomorrow." The doorbell rang, and Emma raced to answer it, her sock feet sliding on the hardwood floor. Jake heard Eleanor's warm greeting, followed by Emma's excited chatter about her day. By the time they reached the kitchen, Emma was already showing Eleanor her latest ballet certificate, received that morning at her weekend class. Eleanor had dressed casually for dinner, as had become her habit, dark jeans and a simple sweater that softened her usual sharp edges. She carried a bakery box in one hand and a bottle of wine in the other. "Something smells wonderful," she said, setting her offerings on the counter. "Dad's famous roast chicken," Emma announced proudly. "He only makes it for special occasions." "Then I'm honored to be included." Eleanor's gaze met Jake's over Emma's head, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. These Sunday dinners had indeed become special occasions, anticipated by all 3 of them for different reasons. For Jake, they represented a strange new normalcy, a family ritual that had been absent since Sarah's death. For Emma, they were an opportunity to bask in the attention of 2 adults who valued her thoughts and opinions. And for Eleanor, Jake suspected these evenings provided something she'd been missing for far longer than she would admit, Simple human connection without agenda or expectation. Dinner unfolded with the comfortable rhythm they had established over recent weeks. Emma dominated the conversation, bubbling with stories from school and dance class. Eleanor listened attentively, asking questions that demonstrated she remembered details from previous discussions: the name of Emma's best friend, the teacher who had praised her science work, the challenging ballet sequences she'd been practicing. As they enjoyed Eleanor's contribution of chocolate mousse, the conversation shifted to the investigation. Mercer found something interesting in the security footage from Whitmore Insurance, Eleanor said, her tone shifting slightly toward the professional. Hayes accessed the building at 2:13 a.m. 2 weeks before the fire, using his security badge. Victor Hayes, Deputy Chief of Risk Management, had emerged as another potential suspect in recent days, a longtime employee who had expected to be promoted to department head, but was passed over when Eleanor brought in someone from outside with more digital security experience. What was he doing there in the middle of the night? Jake asked, immediately alert. According to the access logs, he went to the records archive room where personnel files are kept, including mine. Eleanor's expression tightened. With contact information, home address, security system details, everything he'd need to plan the sabotage. Jake glanced at Emma, who was happily scraping the last of her dessert from the bowl, apparently uninterested in the adult conversation. We should tell Mercer right away. I already have. He's adding Hayes to the formal investigation. Eleanor hesitated, then added in a lower voice, there's something else. 2 days before that night, Hayes met with someone in the building after hours. The visitor signed in under a false name, but the security camera footage shows a profile that matches James. The implications were immediate and troubling. So they were working together? James provides the motive and possibly the funding, while Hayes provides the inside access and technical expertise? It appears that way. Eleanor's gaze shifted to Emma, a protective instinct visible in her expression. We can discuss the details later. Jake nodded, appreciating her discretion around his daughter. Emma, why don't you get your science project materials to show Eleanor while I clean up? Emma eagerly complied, racing to her room to gather her half-completed model of the water cycle. When she was out of earshot, Eleanor leaned closer to Jake. Hayes has been acting strangely at work, requesting reassignment to different projects, avoiding direct meetings with me. When I questioned him about the cornerstone safety inspections, he became defensive, suggested we were overreacting to limited data. Is he still coming to work? Jake asked, surprised. For now, Mercer suggested we maintain normalcy to avoid tipping our hand. Eleanor's expression hardened, but I've revoked his after-hours access and assigned my security team to monitor his activities. What about James? Any direct evidence linking him to the fire? Nothing conclusive yet, but his company's financial records show unusual transfers to an offshore account that Mercer is investigating. Eleanor glanced toward Emma's room, lowering her voice further. Jake, if they're working together, this goes beyond a simple act of revenge. This was a calculated attack that could have killed me and did endanger you. The seriousness of her tone sent a chill through Jake. He'd been so focused on the positive changes in his life that he'd almost forgotten the danger that had brought them together in the first place. We need to be careful, he agreed. All of us. Eleanor nodded, her hand briefly touching his on the counter, a gesture of solidarity that lingered a moment longer than necessary. I've increased security at my hotel suite. You should consider additional measures here as well. Before Jake could respond, Emma returned, arms laden with poster board, colored markers, and cotton balls for her cloud formations. Eleanor smoothly transitioned back to her warm, attentive mode, helping Emma arrange the materials on the dining table and discussing scientific concepts in terms the 7-year-old could understand. Jake watched them together, struck by how natural they seemed. Eleanor patiently explaining evaporation rates, while Emma nodded seriously, absorbing the information. In these moments, the formidable CEO disappeared completely, replaced by a woman who might have been a teacher, a friend, or even a surrogate mother. The thought caught Jake by surprise, a complex tangle of emotions rising unexpectedly. Sarah had been gone for 5 years, and while Jake had dated occasionally, he'd never allowed anyone to form a meaningful connection with Emma. Yet here was Eleanor, seamlessly integrating into their lives, bringing not just material benefits, but genuine warmth and mentorship to his daughter. Even more surprising was his own reaction to Eleanor. The resentment that had initially colored their relationship had faded, replaced by respect, gratitude, and something else he wasn't quite ready to name. A pull that made him notice the way lamplight caught in her dark hair, the rare sound of her genuine laughter, the intelligent focus in her eyes when she listened rather than merely waiting to speak. As the evening drew to a close and Emma's bedtime approached, Eleanor helped clean up the science materials while Jake supervised Emma's preparation for bed. When he returned to the living room, he found Eleanor standing on the small balcony, gazing out at the city lights, a glass of wine in her hand. "Emma says goodnight," Jake said, joining her in the cool evening air. "She wants you to know that you're the best science helper ever, even better than Mrs. Williams at school, which is apparently the highest possible praise." Eleanor smiled, the expression softening her features. "She's a remarkable child, Jake, so curious, so determined. You've done an amazing job raising her." "Some days I wonder if I'm doing anything right," Jake admitted, leaning against the railing. "Single parenting isn't exactly what I planned for. But you keep showing up. That's what matters." Eleanor's gaze remained on the city spread before them, lights twinkling against the darkening sky. "My father, my birth father, wasn't a bad man, but he was absent, always working, always distracted. When I lost both my parents, Robert became the first adult who truly saw me, who made me feel that my thoughts and feelings mattered." It was the most Eleanor had ever shared about her early life, and Jake recognized the gift of trust it represented. Sterling had that quality, making people feel valued. It made him a great captain and a wonderful father. Eleanor turned to face him, her expression open in a way Jake had rarely seen. "I've been thinking about what he would think of me now, of the choices I've made. For years, I convinced myself that my success in business would have made him proud, but now—" "He would be proud of you," Jake said with certainty. "Maybe not of every decision, but of the woman you are, the integrity you have shown in facing your mistakes." Eleanor studied him, something vulnerable flickering in her eyes. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I knew him. And because I'm starting to know you." Jake held her gaze, the moment stretching between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Eleanor broke the connection first, setting down her wine glass with a deliberate motion. "I should go. It's getting late, and we both have early starts tomorrow." Jake walked her to the door, the comfortable atmosphere of moments before replaced by a strange tension, as if they'd approached a boundary neither was quite ready to cross. "Thank you for dinner," Eleanor said formally, retrieving her jacket from the coat rack. "Thanks for the dessert, and for helping with Emma's project." Jake hesitated, then added, "Same time next Sunday?" Eleanor nodded, a smile touching her lips. "I wouldn't miss it." After she left, Jake stood in the doorway longer than necessary, listening to the fading sound of her footsteps down the hallway. Something had shifted between them tonight, a connection forming that went beyond obligation or gratitude, beyond even the friendship that had been developing. It both exhilarated and terrified him. The Fire Academy classroom fell silent as Jake completed his demonstration of proper ventilation techniques during a structural fire. 24 recruits watched with expressions ranging from intense concentration to obvious admiration. After just 2 weeks of teaching, Jake had already developed a reputation as an instructor who balanced theoretical knowledge with practical experience, who could explain complex concepts in accessible terms without oversimplifying the dangers. "Remember," Jake concluded, replacing the equipment, "ventilation decisions can mean the difference between controlling a fire and watching it explode out of control. You're not just creating an escape path for smoke, you're managing the fire's oxygen supply, its direction, its intensity." A hand raised near the back of the room. Jessica Chen, a focused young woman with military precision in her questions and comments. "Sir, is it true you recently rescued someone from a burning mansion? That seems to contradict the safety protocols you've been teaching us." The question caught Jake off guard. News of his rescue of Eleanor had apparently spread through the department grapevine, reaching even the new recruits. "The situation you're referring to involved unique circumstances," Jake answered carefully. "But yes, I made a risk assessment and determined the rescue was viable." "But sir," Chen pressed, "how do you know when to follow procedure and when to trust your gut?" It was a good question, better than she knew. Jake considered his answer, aware that his words would shape these recruits' approach to life and death situations. The purpose of training isn't to replace instinct with rules, he said finally. It's to align your instincts with sound principles so that when you have to make those split-second choices, you're drawing on both. He moved between the rows of desks, making eye contact with each student. Captain Sterling, my former commanding officer, used to say that a good firefighter knows the rules, but a great firefighter knows when the situation demands more. The mention of Captain Sterling brought Eleanor to mind, as it increasingly did these days. They had dinner plans that evening to discuss the latest developments in the Hayes investigation. Over the past weeks, their relationship had evolved into something neither had anticipated, a partnership built on shared purpose and growing mutual respect. As the class ended and the recruits filed out, Jake's phone buzzed with a text from Mercer. New evidence. Meeting in my office at 3. Bring Whitmore. Jake frowned at the cryptic message, quickly texting Eleanor to inform her of the change in plans. Her response came immediately. Already on my way. We'll pick you up outside the academy at 2:30. The academy's administrative director stopped Jake in the hallway as he gathered his materials, her expression pleased. The feedback on your classes has been excellent, Morrison. The recruits appreciate your real-world perspective. They're a good group, Jake replied, asking the right questions, challenging assumptions. Captain Sterling would be proud to see you here. The director smiled warmly. He always said you had a gift for teaching. The casual mention of Sterling no longer caught Jake by surprise. Since learning of Eleanor's connection to his former captain, he'd noticed Sterling's influence throughout the department. Relationships formed, careers guided, values instilled. The man's legacy lived on in countless ways, including the unexpected connection between Jake and Eleanor. Eleanor's town car arrived precisely at 2:30, the driver holding the door as Jake slid into the back seat beside her. She was in full CEO mode today, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, her hair pulled back in a sleek chignon, tablet in hand as she reviewed documents. How was class? She asked, glancing up briefly. Good. They're starting to ask the hard questions, which is a positive sign. Jake settled into the leather seat, still not entirely comfortable with the luxury of Eleanor's corporate transportation. Any idea what Mercer's found? He was deliberately vague on the phone, just said it was significant and related to Hayes. Eleanor set aside her tablet, giving Jake her full attention. How was Emma this morning? She seemed tired when I left last night. The casual inquiry about his daughter no longer surprised Jake. Eleanor had developed a genuine interest in Emma's well-being, remembering details about her school projects, dance recitals, and friendships. Excited about the science project, she's convinced she'll win first prize, especially with your expert help. Jake smiled, recalling Emma's enthusiasm at breakfast. She asked if you could come to her school presentation next week. Something softened in Eleanor's expression. I'd be honored. Just send me the details, and I'll clear my schedule. The ease with which she prioritized Emma touched Jake deeply. In his experience, corporate executives didn't rearrange multi-million-dollar meetings for a second grader's science presentation. Yet Eleanor had consistently shown that Emma mattered to her, not as an obligation or a way to impress Jake, but genuinely. Mercer's office was located in a nondescript government building downtown, the bland exterior hiding the sophisticated forensic equipment and experienced investigators within. The arson investigator greeted them with his usual direct manner, gesturing them into his cluttered workspace without preamble. We've got something, he said, activating a large screen on one wall. Hayes has been accessing sensitive files from the Whitmore insurance servers, not just random snooping, but targeted searches for information about the Cornerstone contractor's investigation. The screen displayed a log of system activities, timestamps highlighting suspicious patterns. Eleanor studied the data with a frown. He's bypassed normal security protocols, she noted. These files are restricted, accessible only to the board and senior management. Exactly. Mercer pulled up another screen. And look at the timing. These access attempts intensified immediately after your board approved the safety inspection initiative. It's like he was panicking, trying to gather as much information as possible. Jake leaned forward, processing the implications. So Hayes has a stake in keeping the Cornerstone issues quiet. A financial interest? Better than that, Mercer displayed another document. We found this in Hayes's personnel file. Before joining Whitmore Insurance, he worked for the city building inspector's office for 8 years. Guess who he approved for licensing 15 years ago? Cornerstone Contractors, Eleanor said, the pieces falling into place. And here's the kicker. Mercer pulled up a final document. His former brother-in-law from a marriage that ended 12 years ago is Thomas Sutton, owner of Westside Electric. Cornerstone's main competitor, Eleanor finished, her expression hardening. So exposing Cornerstone's faulty work would benefit his former family connection and damage the woman who passed him over for promotion, Jake added, the full picture becoming clear, all while creating a major safety initiative that he could potentially lead, rehabilitating his career prospects. Mercer nodded grimly. It fits, but proving it conclusively is challenging without direct evidence linking him to the tampering at the mansion. Eleanor's phone chimed with an incoming message. She glanced at it, her expression changing subtly. It's from Hayes. He's requesting an urgent meeting this afternoon to discuss concerns about the safety inspection process. Jake and Mercer exchanged looks. That's convenient timing, Mercer said carefully. Or an opportunity, Eleanor replied, her analytical mind already working through the possibilities. If I meet with him, wearing a recording device, absolutely not, Jake interrupted, alarmed at the suggestion. This man potentially tried to kill you. Meeting him alone is too dangerous. I wouldn't be alone. We'd ensure security was nearby. Eleanor's tone was resolute. This may be our best chance to get him to incriminate himself. Mercer looked uncomfortable. Morrison's right about the risk, but I've seen these types of operations work before, with proper precautions. There have to be other options, Jake insisted, a protective instinct rising strongly within him. Eleanor turned to face him directly. Jake, we need evidence. Without it, Hayes walks away free to try again, possibly with methods less detectable than electrical tampering. The use of his first name, still rare in their professional interactions, emphasized the personal nature of her appeal. Jake recognized the determination in her eyes, the same resolve that had rebuilt Whitmore Insurance into an industry leader and pushed forward the safety inspection initiative despite board resistance. At least let me be there, he said finally, not in the room but nearby. If anything seems wrong. Agreed, Eleanor nodded, turning back to Mercer. Can you arrange the necessary equipment by 4 o'clock? I'll tell Hayes to meet me at my office at 4:30. As Mercer made the arrangements, Jake fought down his unease. The thought of Eleanor deliberately placing herself in danger disturbed him deeply, more deeply than made sense for their professional relationship. When had her safety become so important to him? When had the line between collaboration and personal concern begun to blur? The answer, he realized, had been gradual but inevitable. Sunday dinners where conversation flowed easily, shared concerns over Emma's future, quiet moments on the balcony when guards were lowered and genuine connection formed. Somewhere along the way, Eleanor Whitmore had become more than a client or colleague. She had become someone he cared about, perhaps more than he was ready to admit. The executive floor of Whitmore Insurance was eerily quiet, most employees having departed for the day. Jake sat in a small security room adjacent to Eleanor's office, watching a monitor that displayed a live feed from the hidden camera. Eleanor sat behind her desk, composed and professional in appearance, though Jake could detect the slight tension in her shoulders. Mercer stood beside him, headphones allowing him to monitor the audio feed, recording equipment capturing every sound from Eleanor's office. A security team waited in strategic positions throughout the floor, ready to respond at the first sign of trouble. He's here, Mercer said quietly as the office door opened on the monitor. Victor Hayes entered with the confident stride of a man who believed himself untouchable. At 47, his carefully maintained physique and expensive suit projected success despite his recent professional disappointment. He took the seat Eleanor offered without waiting for an invitation, his manner suggesting he considered himself her equal despite their different positions. Victor, thank you for coming. Eleanor's voice came clearly through the speakers, perfectly modulated to reveal nothing of her suspicions. You mentioned concerns about the safety inspection initiative? Hayes leaned forward slightly, his expression serious. I've been reviewing the implementation plan, and I'm worried we're moving too aggressively. The timeline for notifying homeowners creates significant liability exposure. How so? Eleanor maintained a neutral tone, giving him room to elaborate. Once we formally notify homeowners about potential electrical hazards, we're acknowledging awareness of a safety issue. If a fire occurs before repairs can be made, we're practically guaranteeing a successful lawsuit against the company. Hayes spread his hands in a gesture of reasonable concern. I'm suggesting a more measured approach, prioritizing the highest risk properties first, addressing others over an extended timeline. That would leave hundreds of families in potential danger for months, Eleanor pointed out, her voice still calm but with an underlying firmness. It's about managing risk, Eleanor. Hayes's use of her first name carried a subtle challenge, both to homeowners and to the company. Jake watched as Eleanor leaned back slightly, studying Hayes with the analytical gaze that had intimidated countless business rivals. The board has already approved the current timeline. What's really bothering you about this initiative, Victor? A flicker of something, annoyance, concern, crossed Hayes's face before his professional mask returned. I'm thinking of the company's interests. That's my job. Is it? Eleanor's tone shifted subtly, becoming more direct. Or is your real concern how this initiative might affect other interests, like those of Westside Electric? Hayes stiffened almost imperceptibly. I'm not sure what you're implying. I think you are. Eleanor maintained steady eye contact. We know about your brother-in-law's company, Victor. We know about your role in approving Cornerstone's original licensing. And we know about your unauthorized access to restricted files related to the investigation. For a moment, Hayes seemed genuinely startled, but he recovered quickly. Checking relevant files is part of my job as risk management deputy. As for Thomas Sutton, that relationship ended with my divorce 12 years ago. Any suggestion of impropriety is not only incorrect, but potentially slanderous. Jake had to admire Hayes's composure. The man was good, deflecting accusations without showing panic. But Eleanor was better. What about your after-hours visit to the building 2 weeks before the fire at my home? She asked, her voice deceptively casual. The security logs show you accessed the personnel records room at 2:13 a.m., a rather unusual time for routine work, wouldn't you say? This time, Hayes's surprise was genuine. His eyes widened slightly before he controlled his reaction. I often work unusual hours. The timing is coincidental. And you're meeting with James Whitmore? Eleanor pressed, laying down her cards one by one. He signed in under a false name, but the security cameras captured his face quite clearly. Hayes's composure finally cracked. A flush spread across his face, his fingers tightening on the arms of his chair. James is a business associate. There's nothing illegal about meeting with him. No, but conspiring to commit arson is definitely illegal. Eleanor's voice hardened, as is attempted murder. That's absurd. Hayes stood abruptly. I don't have to listen to these baseless accusations. Sit down, Victor. Eleanor's command carried the full weight of her authority. Unless you'd prefer to have this conversation with the police, they're very interested in the evidence we've gathered. For a tense moment, Jake thought Hayes might become violent. His face had darkened with anger, his body language rigid with tension. Jake's hand moved to the radio that would summon the security team, but before he could press the button, Hayes sank back into his chair. You have nothing, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. No proof connecting me to any fire. We have more than you think. Eleanor opened a folder on her desk, sliding a photograph across to Hayes. This is from the insurance adjuster's report. Note the distinctive pattern of the electrical tampering, a very specific technique that few people would know how to execute. The same technique, in fact, that was detailed in your master's thesis on electrical engineering. Jake hadn't seen this evidence before and glanced at Mercer in surprise. The investigator shook his head slightly, indicating the evidence was a bluff. A good one, judging by Hayes's reaction. That doesn't prove anything, Hayes said, but sweat had appeared on his forehead. Many electrical engineers would recognize that technique. Perhaps, Eleanor closed the folder with deliberate care, but combined with your access to my personal information, your connection to James Whitmore, your financial interest in discrediting Cornerstone, and your unauthorized file access, it creates a compelling narrative that any prosecutor would be eager to present to a jury. Hayes's face had gone pale, calculation clearly visible in his eyes as he weighed his options. What do you want? The truth, Eleanor said simply, starting with James Whitmore's involvement. A long silence followed, Hayes visibly struggling with his decision. Finally, he sighed, seeming to deflate before their eyes. James approached me 6 months ago after you passed me over for promotion. He knew I was bitter, knew about my history with Cornerstone and Westside. Hayes spoke reluctantly, each word clearly painful. He suggested we could help each other. He wanted the estate back. I wanted recognition for identifying the Cornerstone issues. And the fire, Eleanor pressed. Hayes shook his head vehemently. That wasn't supposed to happen that way. The tampering was designed to cause a small, controllable electrical issue, enough to trigger an investigation that would uncover the wider Cornerstone problems. James provided the technical specifications. I created the access opportunity during a company event at your home. You're saying the fire was an accident? Eleanor's skepticism was evident. That you didn't intend to cause serious damage? The system should have shut down with a minor short circuit, Hayes insisted. Something must have gone wrong with the design. James assured me it was foolproof. Jake exchanged glances with Mercer, both recognizing the classic move of a cornered conspirator, admitting to a lesser offense while denying the more serious charge. Whether Hayes was telling the truth about not intending a major fire was almost irrelevant. Tampering with electrical systems in an occupied home was a serious crime regardless of the intended outcome. Eleanor seemed to reach the same conclusion. You'll provide a full written statement detailing James's involvement and your actions, including dates, meetings, and specifics of the tampering. It wasn't a question, but Hayes nodded anyway, resignation evident in his posture. And in return? I make no promises, Eleanor said coolly, but full cooperation now will be noted when decisions are made about prosecution. As Hayes began to provide details, Mercer turned to Jake with a grim smile. She's good. Got him talking without promising anything specific. Jake nodded, a complex mixture of admiration and concern filling him, as he watched Eleanor masterfully extract a confession. She was indeed formidable, intelligent, strategic, and utterly composed even when facing the man who had endangered her life. Yet beneath her professional exterior, Jake had glimpsed the woman who helped Emma with science projects, who laughed at her own baking failures, who spoke of her adoptive father with lingering grief and love. Which version was the real Eleanor Whitmore? Perhaps Jake was beginning to realize they both were, parts of a whole person more complex than he had initially understood. After Hayes had provided a statement and been escorted from the building by security, Eleanor remained at her desk for a long moment, the accumulated tension of the confrontation finally showing in the slight tremor of her hands as she gathered the papers before her. Jake entered her office quietly, closing the door behind him. You were amazing. Eleanor looked up, a tired smile touching her lips. Not really. I just had better information. You had courage, Jake corrected, crossing to stand before her desk, facing him directly, knowing what he'd done. I've faced worse in boardrooms. Eleanor attempted to maintain her professional demeanor, but Jake could see the emotional toll the confrontation had taken. At least we have confirmation of James's involvement now. Mercer is already contacting the prosecutor's office. Hayes will likely make a deal to testify against James. Jake moved around the desk, an instinctive desire to comfort overriding the professional boundaries they'd maintained. It's over, Eleanor. You're safe. Something in his tone, the use of her first name perhaps, or the genuine concern, caused Eleanor to look up, really seeing him for the first time since Hayes had left. Their eyes met, and the professional masks they both wore slipped momentarily, revealing the deeper connection that had been forming beneath the surface of their collaboration. Thank you, Eleanor said softly, not just for today, but for everything, for trusting me after how we met, for allowing Emma into my life, for... She hesitated, searching for words. For seeing me, not just the CEO. Jake reached out, covering her hand with his own. The simple contact felt momentous, bridging the worlds that had once separated them so completely. I'm seeing you more clearly every day, he said quietly. For a breathless moment, something hovered between them. Possibility, connection, the potential for more. Then Eleanor's phone rang, shattering the moment with its insistent chime. She withdrew her hand reluctantly, checking the display. It's Mercer, she said, regret evident in her voice as she answered the call. Jake stepped back, giving her space as she listened to the investigator's update. The moment had passed, but something had shifted between them. A boundary crossed, an understanding reached without words. As Eleanor concluded her call, she looked up at Jake with renewed determination. The prosecutor wants statements from both of us tonight. And there's more. James has been seen making preparations to leave the country. They're expediting an arrest warrant, but we need to move quickly. Jake nodded, professional focus returning. I'll call Mrs. Patterson to stay with Emma. We can go directly to the prosecutor's office. Eleanor gathered her things, the vulnerable woman of moments before replaced by the decisive CEO. But as they headed for the elevator, she paused, turning to Jake with an expression he couldn't quite interpret. When this is over, she said, her voice softer than usual, we should talk about everything. Jake understood the significance of what she wasn't saying, the growing connection between them, the blurring lines between professional and personal, the future that neither had anticipated, but both were beginning to envision. I'd like that, he replied simply. As they rode the elevator down in companionable silence, Jake realized how completely his perception of Eleanor had transformed. The cold executive who had dismissed him 6 months ago now seemed like a stranger, a two-dimensional character compared to the complex, caring woman beside him. Through Sunday dinners and shared confidences, through Emma's science projects and late-night conversations, he had come to know the real Eleanor Whitmore, brilliant and flawed, guarded and generous, struggling like everyone else to reconcile who she was with, who she wanted to be. And somewhere along the way, against all odds and expectations, Jake Morrison had begun to fall in love with her. The realization should have terrified him, but instead, it filled him with a quiet certainty. Whatever happened next, whether they captured James, whether Eleanor felt the same, whether their worlds could truly merge, Jake knew that their lives had become irrevocably connected. From the ashes of that mansion fire, something unexpected had grown, a second chance for both of them, a new beginning forged in flames. Second Chance Flames Part 5, the prosecutor's office buzzed with late-night activity, assistants rushing between offices with files while investigators huddled around computer screens. Jake and Eleanor had been separated for their official statements, a standard procedure to ensure independent accounts. 3 hours of detailed questioning had left Jake mentally exhausted, the adrenaline of Hayes' confrontation finally wearing off. He sat in a small waiting area, styrofoam cup of bitter coffee cooling in his hands. The clock on the wall read 10:42 p.m. Mrs. Patterson had texted an hour ago that Emma was asleep, asking only once when her father would be home. The familiar guilt of parental absence tugged at Jake's conscience. Another missed bedtime. Another morning when he'd have to explain his absence. Eleanor emerged from a conference room looking remarkably composed despite the hour and circumstances. Her suit remained unwrinkled, her expression alert, though Jake could detect the subtle signs of fatigue in the set of her shoulders and the tightness around her eyes. Are they finished with you? Jake asked as she joined him. For now. Eleanor sank into the chair beside him with unusual heaviness. The prosecutor is confident Hayes' testimony will be enough to secure charges against James, but they are still building the case. What happens next? They're executing a search warrant at James's residence tonight. The arrest warrant has been issued, but they need to locate him first. Eleanor ran a hand through her hair, a rare gesture of dishevelment. He's not at his home or office. His assistant claims he's on a business trip, but his private jet filed a flight plan for the Caymans tomorrow morning. Jake frowned, the implications clear. He's planning to flee. It appears so, Eleanor's voice was tight with controlled anger. After everything, the tampering, the risk to innocent lives, he still thinks he can simply walk away. A young assistant district attorney approached them, tablet in hand. Ms. Whitmore, Mr. Morrison, we've arranged for security details for both of you until James Whitmore is in custody. Officers will escort you home and remain posted outside your residences. Eleanor nodded her thanks, but Jake could see calculation in her eyes. The CEO assessing risks and resources. When the ADA left, she turned to Jake with lowered voice. I'm concerned about Emma. If James realizes he's cornered, he might lash out in unexpected ways. The suggestion sent a chill through Jake. He hadn't considered that his daughter might become a target. You think he'd go after a child? I think desperation makes people dangerous. James has already demonstrated he's willing to risk lives to get what he wants. Eleanor's expression softened with genuine concern. Would you consider moving Emma somewhere temporary, just until James is in custody? I have a secure property outside the city. I'm not uprooting my daughter in the middle of the night, Jake interrupted, the protective parent overriding rational assessment. She's already asleep, already unsettled by my absence tonight. Eleanor nodded, respecting his decision. Then allow me to add additional security to your building. Private professionals, not just the police detail. Jake wanted to refuse on principle, the instinct to handle problems himself deeply ingrained, but Emma's safety transcended pride. All right, thank you. They left the prosecutor's office together, police escorts waiting to accompany them to their respective homes. In the quiet vestibule, away from the bustle of activity, Eleanor hesitated. Jake, about earlier, in my office. Her usual confidence wavered, uncertainty visible in her expression. We don't have to talk about that now, Jake said gently, understanding her reticence. Let's focus on getting through this first. Relief and something like disappointment flickered across Eleanor's face. You're right, of course. Safety first. She reached out, briefly touching his arm. Take care of yourself and Emma. I'll call you when I hear any updates. Jake watched her walk away with her security detail, struck by how quickly their lives had become intertwined. 6 months ago, she had been a distant figure of corporate authority, dismissing him without a second thought. Now her safety occupied his thoughts. Her absence left a tangible void, and the prospect of deeper connection both exhilarated and terrified him. Outside, the night air was cool against his face as he climbed into the police cruiser that would escort him home. The city streets passed in a blur of neon and shadow, his mind cycling through the day's revelations. Hayes' confession, James's flight plan, the growing certainty that this conflict was approaching its climax. The officer remained posted in the hallway outside Jake's apartment as he quietly entered, the security of home washing over him. He checked on Emma first, finding her peacefully asleep, her small face relaxed in dreams, one arm wrapped around the stuffed giraffe Sarah had given her on her last birthday. The gold locket from Captain Sterling gleamed softly at her throat, a tangible connection to a legacy she was only beginning to understand. Jake adjusted her blanket, overcome with love and protectiveness. Whatever happened with James Whitmore, whatever developed between him and Eleanor, Emma's well-being would remain his North Star, the fixed point around which all other considerations revolved. Sleep proved elusive despite his exhaustion. Jake lay awake, reviewing the investigation, considering vulnerabilities, planning contingencies. Eleanor had been right about the danger James potentially posed, not just to her, but to anyone connected to the case. The man had demonstrated calculation and patience in his vendetta against Eleanor. If cornered, his response could be unpredictable. Jake's phone buzzed on the nightstand just after midnight. A text from Eleanor. Security team in place at your building. 2 professionals, both former military. Try to rest. The message carried more than professional concern, the underlying personal care evident even in the brief text. Jake replied with simple thanks, finding comfort in the connection despite the circumstances. When he finally drifted to sleep, his dreams were fragmented. Fire and smoke, Eleanor trapped behind glass, Captain Sterling's voice echoing warnings he couldn't quite understand. He woke at dawn, unrested but alert, the certainty of approaching conflict heavy in his mind. Emma was unusually quiet during breakfast, sensing the tension despite Jake's efforts to maintain normalcy. She picked at her cereal, eyes occasionally drifting to the window where morning light illuminated the unfamiliar car parked across the street, Eleanor's security detail, maintaining discreet watch. Is something wrong, Daddy? She finally asked, her perception sharper than Jake sometimes remembered. Jake considered how much to share with a 7-year-old. I'm helping Eleanor with a difficult situation at work. Some grown-up problems that need solving. Emma nodded solemnly. Is that why there are police outside? Are the bad guys after you? The directness of her question caught Jake off guard. How did you know about the police? Mrs. Patterson told me they brought you home last night. Emma's expression was serious beyond her years. And there's a man in the lobby who wasn't there before. He looks like the security guards at the museum. Jake sighed, recognizing the futility of shielding her completely. We're being extra careful right now, that's all. Like wearing a helmet when you ride your bike. It doesn't mean you're going to phantom, just that you're being smart. Emma seemed to accept this explanation, though her next question revealed continued concern. Is Eleanor in danger? She has people looking out for her too, Jake assured her, struck by how quickly Eleanor had become a fixed presence in their lives, someone Emma worried about and cared for. Good, I like Eleanor. Emma returned to her cereal with renewed appetite. She's coming to my science presentation, you know, she promised. I know, sweetheart. Jake smiled at his daughter's priorities. Even amid security concerns, the science presentation remained paramount, and Eleanor always keeps her promises. After breakfast, Jake walked Emma to school himself rather than allowing her to take the bus, the security detail following at a discreet distance. The school's resource officer had been briefed about potential security concerns, adding another layer of protection that eased Jake's mind as he reluctantly left Emma in the building's care. His phone rang as he walked back toward the apartment, Eleanor's name lighting up the screen. Any updates? He asked without preamble. They found James's passport and several personal items missing from his home, Eleanor replied, her voice tight with tension. The search uncovered detailed files about the Whitmore estate's electrical system, confirming his technical involvement in the tampering. But no James. No, his credit cards were used at a hotel near the airport last night, but he was gone before officers arrived. Eleanor paused, background noise suggesting she was in motion. The prosecutor wants us both at the district attorney's office at 10. They've received new information they won't discuss over the phone. I'll meet you there. Jake checked his watch. Just enough time to return home, shower, and change before the meeting. Jake. Eleanor hesitated, her voice softening. How's Emma this morning? The question, personal, concerned, focused on his daughter rather than the investigation, touched him deeply. Perceptive as always, she noticed the security, asked if you were in danger. I'm sorry she's been dragged into this. She also made a point of reminding me you promised to attend her science presentation. Jake couldn't help smiling at the memory. Apparently that commitment ranks higher than any security concerns. Eleanor's laugh, warm and genuine, carried through the phone. Priority noted, I wouldn't miss it for anything. The simple declaration settled something in Jake's chest. A certainty that whatever complications lay ahead, Eleanor's integration into their lives had become meaningful not just to him, but to Emma as well. The district attorney's office was more formal than the working spaces they'd occupied the previous night. Rosemary Chen, the assistant district attorney handling the case, was a sharp-featured woman in her 50s with the focused intensity of someone who rarely lost in court. She gestured Jake and Eleanor to seats at a polished conference table where Mercer and two other investigators already waited. Thank you for coming on short notice, Chen began without preamble. We've received intelligence that significantly alters our understanding of James Whitmore's intentions. She nodded to one of the investigators who distributed folders to everyone present. At 6:17 this morning, this email was sent from James Whitmore's account to the board of directors at Whitmore Insurance, several news outlets, in the prosecutor's office. Jake opened the folder, finding a printout of the email. The message was brief but chilling. To whom it may concern, by the time you read this, I will have left the country. I refuse to be the scapegoat in Eleanor Whitmore's desperate attempt to deflect attention from her own negligence. Victor Hayes is a convenient patsy, manipulated to protect Eleanor's position and Whitmore Insurance's profits. The evidence against me has been fabricated, the testimony coerced. The true story of corporate corruption at Whitmore Insurance deserves to be told, and I have provided that evidence to select journalists who will publish it regardless of what happens to me. Eleanor Whitmore will not destroy my reputation to save her own. James Whitmore. This is absurd, Eleanor said, setting down the printout with controlled anger. He's attempting to flip the narrative completely. Standard tactic for someone in his position, Chen agreed. But the concerning part isn't the email itself. It's what our cyber team discovered when they traced its origin. She nodded to the investigator again, who pulled up an image on the room's display screen, a map with a blinking indicator. The email wasn't sent from the airport hotel or even from a mobile device. It originated from a guest house on the Whitmore estate property. Jake stared at the map, processing the implications. He's still at the estate? That makes no sense. It's the first place you'd look. The mansion itself is uninhabitable after the fire, Mercer pointed out. The security system was compromised. Nobody's been monitoring the property except for the insurance adjuster's scheduled visits. The perfect hiding place, Chen concluded, hidden in plain sight on a property everyone assumes is abandoned. Eleanor's expression had gone carefully blank, the CEO mask firmly in place. You believe he's still there now? The cyber team continues to detect network activity from the location. Chen's gaze was direct, assessing. We're preparing a tactical team to apprehend him, but given his history and potential instability, we wanted to brief you both first. He chose that location deliberately, Eleanor said, her analytical mind visibly processing the situation. It's not just convenience, it's symbolic. The estate represents everything he believes I took from him. And now he's using it as his base of operations, Jake added, a cold certainty forming in his gut. This isn't just about escaping consequences. He's planning something else. Chen studied them both, her expression grave. Our psychological profiler agrees with that assessment. Based on the escalating pattern of behavior, James Whitmore is unlikely to simply flee. He wants a reckoning. With me, Eleanor concluded, her voice steady despite the implication. Most likely, Chen confirmed, which is why we're advising both of you to remain in secure locations until he's in custody. The tactical team will move in at noon, when visibility is optimal. As the briefing continued, detailing security and arrangements and communication protocols, Jake found himself watching Eleanor. Her composed exterior revealed nothing to casual observers, but he had learned to read the subtle signs of her tension. The slight tightening around her eyes, the too-perfect posture, the controlled rhythm of her breathing. She was afraid, not panicked, but genuinely concerned, yet refusing to show vulnerability in this professional setting. When the meeting concluded, Jake and Eleanor were escorted to separate, secure vehicles that would take them to their respective protected locations. In the privacy of the hallway before they parted, Jake touched Eleanor's arm lightly. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly, pitching his voice below the hearing of their security details. Eleanor met his gaze, allowing her mask to slip just slightly. "I will be when this is over. I just keep thinking about all the people he's endangered. You, Emma, the families living in homes with faulty wiring, all for revenge against me." "This isn't your fault," Jake said firmly. "James made his choices." "Perhaps." Eleanor's smile didn't reach her eyes. "But I chose him once, trusted him. That error in judgment has rippled outward, affecting innocent lives." Before Jake could respond, her security detail approached, politely indicating it was time to leave. Eleanor squared her shoulders, the vulnerable moment passing as she nodded farewell and followed her escorts. Jake watched her go, a sense of unease settling in his chest. Something about the situation felt wrong. James hiding at the estate, the convenient discovery of the email origin, the planned noon raid. It was too neat, too predictable for a man who had demonstrated sophisticated planning and technical expertise. As his own security detail led him toward the waiting vehicle, Jake's phone vibrated with an incoming text. Unknown number, but the message stopped his heart. "Mr. Morrison, I have your daughter. If you want to see her alive again, come to Whitmore Insurance headquarters alone. Tell no one. You have 30 minutes. Attached was a photo of Emma, clearly frightened but unharmed, sitting in what appeared to be an office chair, the Whitmore Insurance logo visible on the wall behind her. Jake froze, ice flooding his veins. Emma had been at school, protected by both the resource officer and Eleanor's security detail. How could James have gotten to her? The tactical team was focusing on the estate, while James had somehow taken Emma to the Whitmore building instead. Training and instinct warred within him. The firefighter who followed protocol versus the father who would do anything to protect his child. There was no real choice. Jake glanced at his security detail, who had paused several steps ahead, waiting for him. "I need to use the restroom before we go," Jake said, gesturing to a door they had just passed. "Give me 2 minutes." The security officer nodded, taking up position outside the door as Jake entered. Moving quickly, Jake located the bathroom's second exit, a maintenance access he'd noticed during their arrival. Within seconds, he had slipped away from his protection and was moving through the building's back quarters toward the parking garage. Hot wiring a maintenance vehicle took precious seconds, but soon Jake was driving toward Whitmore Insurance headquarters, his mind racing through scenarios and options. Protocol demanded he alert authorities, but Emma's life wasn't something he was willing to risk on standard procedure. James had demonstrated he was willing to endanger lives. Jake wouldn't gamble with his daughter's safety. He tried calling Eleanor as he drove, but her phone went straight to voicemail, likely secured or confiscated by her protection detail. With no backup and time ticking away, Jake focused on what he knew about the Whitmore building, its security systems, and potential entry points. As an instructor at the fire academy, he had access to building schematics for most major structures in the city, including Whitmore Insurance. The headquarters appeared deceptively normal as Jake approached. Employees entering and leaving, no visible signs of disturbance. Whatever James was doing, he had managed to avoid triggering obvious alarms. Jake parked the maintenance vehicle in a loading zone, grabbed a toolbox from the back to provide cover, and approached a service entrance he knew would have minimal security monitoring. His borrowed maintenance uniform and confident stride carried him past initial security. The real challenge would be reaching the executive floor where, based on the logo placement in the photo, James was holding Emma. The executive elevator required keycard access, but Jake had observed Eleanor's code during their previous visits. With luck and timing, it might work. The lobby was busy with late morning activity, employees focused on their own concerns, none aware of the drama unfolding above them. Jake moved purposefully toward the executive elevator, timing his approach to coincide with a group of suited executives already waiting. He merged with them seamlessly, another faceless worker in the building's ecosystem. When the elevator arrived, Jake followed the group inside, positioning himself near the back. One executive swiped his card and pressed the button for the 40th floor, exactly where Jake needed to go. He forced himself to breathe normally, to project calm, despite the frantic worry for Emma churning inside him. The elevator ascended smoothly, stopping at several floors to discharge passengers, until only Jake and one distracted executive remained. When they reached the 40th floor, Jake followed the man out, maintaining his purposeful demeanor, until the executive turned down a different corridor. The executive floor was eerily quiet, most offices empty. Jake moved cautiously, listening for any sound that might indicate Emma's location. The photo had shown a standard office environment, not Eleanor's distinctive corner suite. James could have her anywhere on the floor. A muffled sound from the main conference room caught Jake's attention. A child's voice, then a deeper male response. Jake approached carefully, years of firefighter training guiding his silent movement. Through the partially open door, he could see Emma seated at the conference table, coloring on what appeared to be company letterhead. James Whitmore stood at the window, phone to his ear, his back to the door. Jake assessed the situation quickly. Emma appeared physically unharmed, though clearly nervous. James showed no visible weapon, but that didn't mean he wasn't armed. The conference room had two exits, the main door Jake was watching, and a secondary door that connected to an adjacent office. Jake caught Emma's eye through the gap, pressing a finger to his lips in the universal signal for silence. Her eyes widened in recognition, but she maintained her composure, returning her attention to her coloring with only the slightest nod to indicate she understood. James continued his phone conversation, unaware of Jake's presence. Must be nearly there. Yes, I have the child. No, she's unharmed. This ends today, one way or another. Jake's mind raced, calculating options. A direct confrontation risked Emma's safety, but waiting for James to complete whatever plan he had in motion was equally dangerous. The decision was made for him when James turned, spotting Jake through the partially open door. "I'll call you back," James said into the phone, his expression shifting from surprise to calculated assessment. Morrison, right on time." Jake pushed the door fully open, entering the conference room with deliberate calm. "Emma, are you okay?" "Daddy!" Emma half rose from her chair, but James placed a restraining hand on her shoulder. "She's fine," James said, his tone conversational despite the circumstances. "We've been having a lovely chat about her science project. Very bright child. Takes after her father, I assume." Jake maintained eye contact with James, projecting a confidence he didn't entirely feel. "Let her go," This is between you and Eleanor. Oh, but that's where you're wrong. James's smile didn't reach his eyes. You made yourself part of this the moment you saved Eleanor from that fire. The noble firefighter rushing in where others would flee. His tone turned mocking. Captain Sterling would be so proud. The mention of Sterling sent a chill through Jake. How do you know about Sterling? Eleanor talks in her sleep. James's smile widened at Jake's barely concealed reaction. Oh yes, during our brief marriage I learned quite a lot about dear Robert Sterling and his precious protege, Jake Morrison, the firefighter with the gift, the man who could see through smoke. He gestured dismissively. She was quite obsessed with living up to Daddy's expectations. Jake forced himself to focus on the immediate threat rather than the psychological warfare. What do you want, James? Initially, just the estate that rightfully belonged to my family before Eleanor manipulated her way into ownership. James moved to the window, gazing out at the city below. But now I want recognition, acknowledgement that Eleanor Whitmore isn't the corporate saint she pretends to be. By endangering a child? Jake kept his voice level, though rage simmered beneath the surface. That's not going to improve your public image. James laughed, the sound entirely without humor. Public image is malleable, Mr. Morrison. With the right narrative, even kidnapping becomes a desperate act of justice against corporate corruption. He checked his watch. And speaking of Eleanor, she should be arriving any moment. The statement caught Jake off guard. Eleanor, she's under protection. Protection that received an urgent message from the district attorney, redirecting her here for an emergency meeting. James's smile was coldly triumphant. Technology is wonderfully accommodating when you know the right people. Jake's mind raced, processing the implications. James had orchestrated all of this. The discovery of his location at the estate, the tactical team deployment there, the faked message to Eleanor's security detail. It was an elaborate diversion to draw them both to a location James controlled. The email from the estate, Jake said, understanding dawning. You wanted them to find it. Very good, James nodded approvingly. A simple remote access point, activated from here but appearing to originate there. Basic misdirection while the real work happens elsewhere. And what exactly is the real work? Jake asked, stalling for time while trying to catch Emma's eye, to somehow signal an escape plan. James gestured expansively. Justice, Mr. Morrison, public exposure. By day's end, everyone will know that Eleanor Whitmore sacrificed public safety for corporate profits, that she buried evidence of faulty wiring to protect her company's bottom line. That's a lie, Jake said flatly. Eleanor pushed for the safety inspections despite board resistance. Truth is subjective in the court of public opinion. James moved to a laptop on the conference table. I prepared a very compelling narrative, complete with selectively edited documents from Whitmore insurance servers. By the time I'm finished, Eleanor's reputation will be in ashes, much like her precious family home. The elevator chimes sounded from the lobby area, followed by the click of heels on marble. James smiled, expectant. Right on schedule. Jake tensed, scenarios flashing through his mind. Eleanor was walking into a trap, Emma remained in danger, and James clearly had further plans beyond this confrontation. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, options narrowing with each passing second. Emma, Jake said calmly, maintaining eye contact with James, remember what we practiced for fire drills? When I say go, The conference room door opened, cutting off Jake's instructions. Eleanor stood in the doorway, her expression shifting from professional readiness to shock as she took in the scene, James standing triumphantly by the window, Emma seated at the table, Jake positioned tensely between them. What is this? She demanded, her gaze locking on James. Where is the district attorney? There is no meeting, Eleanor. James's voice carried the satisfaction of a predator whose trap has sprung perfectly. Just a family reunion of sorts. Please join us. Eleanor's eyes found Emma, genuine fear flashing across her features before she controlled her reaction. Are you all right, sweetheart? She asked gently. Emma nodded, her small face brave despite her obvious fear. He said I had to wait for you, that you needed to see something important. And so she does, James interrupted, reaching into his jacket to withdraw a small handgun. Now that we're all here, we can proceed with the main event. The appearance of the weapon changed everything. Jake shifted subtly, calculating angles and distances, the protective parent and former firefighter assessing risks and options with professional speed. James, this is madness, Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the gun now pointed in her direction. The police know where you are. The tactical team is currently surrounding an empty guest house. James laughed shortly. Eleanor, did you think I wouldn't anticipate your moves? I've been planning this for months. Planning what exactly? Eleanor asked, her gaze flicking momentarily to Jake, a silent communication passing between them. Your downfall. James gestured with the gun toward the laptop. In precisely 3 minutes, a comprehensive data package will be automatically uploaded to major news outlets, regulatory agencies, and law enforcement. Emails, reports, inspection documents, all showing how Whitmore Insurance systematically buried evidence of safety hazards to protect profits. Fabricated documents, Eleanor countered, edging slowly into the room, positioning herself between James and Emma. Details, details. James waved dismissively with his free hand. The public won't care once the narrative takes hold. Your company will face investigations, lawsuits, penalties. Everything you've built will crumble. As James focused on Eleanor, Jake inched closer to Emma, using the distraction to his advantage. Their eyes met briefly, Jake giving a tiny nod toward the secondary exit door. Emma blinked her understanding, her small hands slowly releasing her crayon. And the gun? Eleanor asked, maintaining James's attention. How does that fit into your plan for justice? James's expression darkened. Insurance, you might say. Once the upload's complete, we'll take a little trip to the roof. A distraught CEO, overwhelmed by exposure of her crimes, makes a tragic decision. The hero who tried to save her, he gestured toward Jake, tragically fails this time. And Emma? Eleanor's voice remained steady, though her face had paled. She's an innocent child, James. Collateral damage happens in war, Eleanor. You taught me that when you destroyed my family's legacy. James checked the laptop again. 2 minutes until upload completion. Jake had positioned himself within lunging distance of Emma now, his body tense with readiness. Eleanor seemed to sense his intention, continuing to engage James while subtly shifting to block his line of sight to Emma. This won't bring back your family home, James, she said, her voice softening strategically. It won't restore your legacy. No, but it will ensure yours is equally destroyed. James's attention had fixed fully on Eleanor now, his obsession evident in his intense focus. Everything you touch will be tainted. Your company, your reputation, even your precious firefighter and his daughter. The moment had come. Jake caught Eleanor's eye, saw her imperceptible nod, and made his move. Emma, down! He shouted, lunging forward to sweep his daughter from the chair as Eleanor simultaneously dove toward the laptop. James reacted instantly, swinging the gun toward Eleanor. Jake pushed Emma toward the secondary exit, placing his body between her and James as the first shot rang out, deafening in the confined space. Eleanor cried out, clutching her arm where the bullet had grazed her, but still managed to slam the laptop closed, interrupting the upload. James cursed, advancing on her with the gun raised for a second shot. Jake launched himself at James, driving him back against the window with enough force to crack the glass. The gun discharged again, the bullet embedding in the ceiling as they grappled for control. Run, Emma! Jake shouted, struggling to keep James's weapon hand immobilized. Get help! Through the chaos, Jake was peripherally aware of Emma escaping through the secondary door, of Eleanor moving toward the building's alarm system despite her injury. But his focus remained on James, on the deadly weapon still clutched in the man's hand. James was stronger than his business suits suggested, fueled by rage and desperation. He brought his knee up hard into Jake's injured leg, exploiting the old weakness with calculated cruelty. Jake's grip faltered as pain exploded through his knee, giving James enough leverage to break free. The gun swung toward Jake's chest, James's finger tightening on the trigger. You should have stayed a plumber, he snarled. In that frozen moment, Jake saw everything with crystalline clarity. The hatred in James's eyes, the blood staining Eleanor's sleeve as she reached for the alarm, the emergency sprinkler system above them that had activated during their struggle, water beginning to rain down on the chaotic scene. The letter from Captain Sterling flashed through his mind. Sometimes the bravest person isn't the one who feels no fear. It's the one who knows fear intimately and moves forward anyway. Jake lunged forward rather than away, driving his shoulder into James's midsection as the gun discharged. Pain blazed through his side, but momentum carried them both backward, crashing through the already weakened window in an explosion of glass and metal. They fell together into open air, 40 stories above the city streets, James's scream of terror cutting through the rush of wind. In the last possible instant, Jake's firefighter training activated, his hands shooting out to catch the window frame, the impact nearly dislocating his shoulder but arresting his fall while James continued his descent alone, the gun tumbling from his hand as he fell. Jake hung suspended outside the building, blood from his gunshot wound soaking his shirt, his grip weakening with each heartbeat. Through the broken window, he could see Eleanor rushing toward him, her face a mask of terror and determination as she reached out across the jagged glass. "Hold on!" she screamed above the wind and alarms. "Jake, please hold on!" With the last of his strength, Jake reached up with his free hand, finding Eleanor's outstretched fingers. Their eyes met as she gripped him with surprising strength, her other hand, the injured one, bracing against the frame despite the obvious pain it caused her. "I've got you," she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "I won't let you fall." And as building security finally responded to the alarms, as emergency personnel flooded the floor, as Emma's voice called frantically for her father from somewhere safely inside, Jake held Eleanor's gaze in her hand, trusting her completely in this moment of ultimate vulnerability. The woman who had once dismissed him without a second thought was now fighting with everything she had to save his life, her own blood mingling with his where their hands clasped in desperate connection. In that suspended moment between life and death, Jake Morrison understood with perfect clarity that second chances came in many forms, some quiet and gradual, others dramatic and life-altering, but all requiring the courage to reach out, to grasp the offered hand, to trust beyond reason or experience. With Eleanor's help and the arriving security team, Jake was pulled back through the broken window, collapsing onto the floor as emergency medical personnel rushed forward. The gunshot wound in his side pumped blood steadily, his vision beginning to blur at the edges as shock set in. "Emma," he managed to say, his voice weak but urgent. "Where's Emma?" "She's safe," Eleanor assured him, her face appearing above his, one hand pressed firmly against his wound, while the other cradled his head. "She found security. She's safe, Jake. You saved her." "We saved her," Jake corrected, his consciousness starting to fade. "Together." Eleanor's tears fell onto his face as she leaned closer, her voice fierce with emotion. "Stay with me, Jake Morrison. Do you hear me? You don't get to leave now. Not when we've just found each other." As darkness closed in around him, Jake felt the pressure of Eleanor's lips against his forehead, a benediction and a promise. Her words followed him into the gathering shadows, a lifeline to which he clung with all his remaining strength. "I love you," she whispered against his skin. "Please stay." Second Chance Flames Part 6. The steady beep of medical monitors formed a reassuring rhythm in the private hospital room. Jake drifted in and out of consciousness, the powerful pain medication blurring the boundaries between sleep and wakefulness. In his more lucid moments, he registered fragments of his surroundings, sunlight filtering through blinds, hushed conversations between doctors, the gentle pressure of a small hand holding his. Emma had barely left his side since he'd been stabilized after surgery. The bullet had torn through his lower abdomen, damaging his liver, but miraculously missing his spine and other vital organs. Lucky, the surgeon had called it, though 3 hours of emergency surgery and the long recovery ahead didn't feel particularly fortunate. Jake opened his eyes to find Emma curled in a chair beside his bed, her face peaceful in sleep despite the uncomfortable position. Someone, Eleanor most likely, had tucked a blanket around her and placed her favorite stuffed giraffe within reach. The golden locket from Captain Sterling gleamed at her throat, a reminder of connections that spanned generations and transcended death itself. On the other side of the bed, Eleanor sat working quietly on a tablet, her injured arm now properly bandaged and resting in a sling. She'd changed from her blood-stained business attire to simple jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back in a casual ponytail that made her look younger, more approachable. She hadn't left the hospital either, alternating between managing the crisis at Whitmore Insurance remotely and keeping watch over Jake and Emma. Jake shifted slightly, a soft groan escaping as pain flared despite the medication. Eleanor looked up immediately, setting aside her work to lean closer. "Hey," she said softly, her professional mask nowhere in evidence. "Welcome back." "How long?" Jake's voice was raspy from disuse and the intubation during surgery. "3 days." Eleanor reached for a cup of ice chips, offering one to soothe his parched lips. "You've been in and out. Do you remember what happened?" Fragments of memory flashed through Jake's mind. The conference room, James with the gun, crashing through the window, Eleanor reaching for him across broken glass. "James?" Eleanor's expression tightened. "He didn't survive the fall." Jake absorbed this information without immediate comment. James Whitmore's death wasn't something he had sought, but neither could he summon regret for the man who had threatened his daughter and tried to kill them all. "Emma?" he asked, glancing at his sleeping child. "Physically fine, emotionally blah." Eleanor sighed. "She's been incredibly brave, but she has nightmares. The hospital psychologist has seen her twice. She recommended continued therapy once you're home." Jake nodded, guilt washing over him. His daughter had witnessed violence no child should see, had been used as a pawn in an adult's revenge scheme. "How did he get to her? The school?" "He never went to the school," Eleanor explained, her voice gentle but direct. "The resource officer and security detail remained in place the entire time. James used a photo of Emma from my office computer, one I had taken at her ballet recital, and digitally altered it to appear recent. The background was from an empty conference room." Relief surged through Jake, followed quickly by self-recrimination. "I should have verified, should have called the school before rushing in." "You reacted as any parent would to a threat against their child," Eleanor interrupted firmly. "James counted on that. He manipulated all of us, creating elaborate distractions to draw us exactly where he wanted us." Jake's gaze drifted to Eleanor's injured arm. "Your wound?" "Just a graze, 12 stitches." She smiled slightly, attempting to lighten the moment. "I've had worse paper cuts from board meeting reports." Jake didn't return the smile, the gravity of what they'd experienced still weighing heavily. "The company, the documents he threatened to release, contained nothing damaging because there was nothing to find." Eleanor's expression grew serious again. "The laptop was damaged in the struggle, but our tech team recovered the files. James had selectively edited legitimate safety inspection reports to make it appear we'd buried evidence of dangers. In reality, those reports were the foundation of our safety initiative." Jake nodded, processing this information through the haze of medication. "So, it's over." "The immediate danger, yes." Eleanor hesitated, clearly weighing how much to share given his condition. "There's still considerable media attention. James's death, the gunfire at headquarters. Your heroism, it's been front-page news." "Heroism," Jake repeated, the words sitting uncomfortably. "I didn't feel heroic, just desperate." Eleanor's expression softened, her hand finding his on the blanket. "You saved Emma. You saved me." Again. Her fingers intertwined with his, warm and certain. "Though I'm beginning to think we should find less dramatic ways to spend time together." The gentle humor drew a small smile from Jake, despite everything. "Dinner and a movie next time?" "It's a date." Eleanor's response was light, but her eyes held a depth of meaning that transcended their casual words. A soft sound from Emma's chair indicated she was waking. She blinked sleepily, then bolted upright when she saw Jake conscious and alert. "Daddy!" She scrambled onto the bed, mindful of his bandages in the careful way of children who have been thoroughly instructed about hospital rules. "You're awake for real this time." "For real," Jake confirmed, his good arm encircling her small frame, drawing her close despite the pain the movement caused. No physical discomfort could compare to the soul-deep relief of holding his daughter safe against his heart. "I was so scared," Emma whispered against his shoulder. "But Eleanor said you were too strong to leave us." And she was right. Jake met Eleanor's gaze over Emma's head, seeing in her eyes the echo of words he only half remembered from the chaos after the window. A confession of love, a plea for him to stay. "Eleanor is usually right," he said softly. It's one of her most annoying qualities. Eleanor laughed, the sound brightening the sterile hospital room. I'll remind you of that during your recovery when you're being a difficult patient. Are you my nurse now? Jake asked, the teasing exchange providing a welcome respite from the heaviness of recent events. I'm whatever you need me to be, Eleanor replied, her tone shifting from playful to earnest in a heartbeat. The simple declaration hung in the air between them, weighted with implications neither was quite ready to fully articulate before an audience, even one as beloved as Emma. A nurse entered with medication and fresh bandages, temporarily interrupting the moment. As she checked Jake's vitals and changed his IV, Eleanor helped Emma gather her things. We should let your dad rest for a bit, she explained gently. We can go to the cafeteria for lunch and come back afterward. Emma looked reluctant to leave until Jake reassured her. I'll be right here, princess. Not going anywhere. Promise? Emma's small face was serious, the recent trauma evident in her need for certainty. Promise. Jake squeezed her hand. Eleanor will take good care of you. After they left, Jake surrendered to the pull of medication and exhaustion, drifting into healing sleep. In his dreams, he saw Captain Sterling standing on a sunlit shore, Sarah beside him, both watching with approving smiles as Jake, Emma, and Eleanor built a sandcastle together. Not a structure of fantasy, but a home, solid and real, with room for past and present to coexist in harmony. 1 year later, the rebuilt Whitmore estate bore little resemblance to its predecessor. Where the original mansion had been imposing and traditional, the new structure embraced openness and light, soaring windows, natural materials, spaces designed for gathering rather than impression. The formal gardens had given way to more playful landscaping, with paths winding through native plantings and a small stream where koi flashed like living jewels beneath the surface. Jake stood on the wide terrace, watching Emma practice ballet moves on the lawn below. At 8 years old, she had recovered from the trauma of the previous year with the resilience of childhood, aided by therapy and the stable support system that had formed around her. The nightmares had gradually faded, replaced by excitement about dance competitions, science club, and her expanding world. She's getting really good, Eleanor observed, joining Jake at the stone balustrade. Ms. Abernathy says she has genuine talent. Must get that from her mother. Jake smiled, remembering Sarah's grace and determination, qualities their daughter had inherited in full measure. The fall recital is in 3 weeks. She's already planning how to arrange her hair. I've been watching YouTube tutorials, Eleanor admitted with a rueful smile. Ballet buns are surprisingly complicated engineering challenges. Jake laughed, the sound easy and natural in a way that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. From CEO to hairstylist. Quite the career change. I contain multitudes, Eleanor replied lightly, leaning against his side with comfortable familiarity. The past year had brought monumental changes for all of them. Jake had fully recovered from his injuries and established himself as one of the Fire Academy's most respected instructors. Eleanor had restructured Whitmore Insurance's leadership model, creating more balance in her professional life while preserving the company's renewed commitment to safety and transparency. Together, they had established the Sterling Foundation, providing scholarships for children of first responders and funding fire safety initiatives in underserved communities. Most significantly, they had gradually, carefully built a life together, beginning with Jake and Emma moving into the guest house on the rebuilt estate, then progressing to shared meals, shared responsibilities, shared dreams. The transition from colleagues to friends to family had unfolded naturally, each step taken with thoughtful consideration of Emma's needs and their own still healing hearts. The contractor called, Eleanor said, changing subjects. The renovation plans for the main house are approved. Construction can start next month if we're ready. The renovation was actually a connecting structure between the main house and guest house, a physical manifestation of the family they were becoming. Jake turned to face Eleanor directly, taking both her hands in his. Are we ready? He asked, the question encompassing far more than construction timelines. Eleanor met his gaze steadily, the corporate mask long since discarded in his presence. I am if you are. Emma seems enthusiastic about the idea. Enthusiastic is an understatement. She's already planning how to decorate the new family room. Jake smiled, then grew more serious. It's a big step, Eleanor. We've been taking big steps since the day we met, she pointed out, running into burning buildings, jumping through windows, falling in love despite every reason not to. When you put it that way, connecting two houses seems pretty tame. Jake drew her closer, his arms encircling her waist. Almost boring. I could live with a little boring after the excitement of our beginning. Eleanor's fingers traced the scar on his side, visible beneath his t-shirt, a permanent reminder of how nearly they had lost everything before it truly began. Jake captured her hand, bringing it to his lips in a gesture that had become familiar between them. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. "I've been waiting for the right moment." Eleanor's eyes widened as he withdrew a small velvet box, not the typical jewelry box of marriage proposals, but something equally significant. Inside, nestled on dark fabric, lay a key attached to a silver firefighter's emblem. "It's a key to the guest house," Jake explained, his voice deepening with emotion. "I know you already have one, but this is different. This isn't about access or convenience. It's about invitation, about choosing to build something permanent together." Eleanor took the key, understanding its symbolic weight. "Jake Morrison, are you asking me to move in with you before we've even connected the houses?" "I'm asking for more than that," Jake said quietly. "I'm asking if you're ready to make this official, not just the living arrangements, but us, the three of us as a family." Eleanor's smile bloomed slowly, transforming her face with joy that reached her eyes and beyond. "I've been ready since I sat beside your hospital bed, watching you breathe and realizing I couldn't imagine life without you in it." Jake cupped her face gently, the journey that had brought them to this point still sometimes feeling miraculous in its unlikelihood. The dismissive CEO and the struggling plumber, brought together by fire and fate, by Captain Sterling's legacy, and their own capacity for growth and forgiveness. "So that's a yes?" he asked, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones with tender precision. "That's a definite yes," Eleanor confirmed, rising on tiptoes to close the distance between them. Their kiss was interrupted by the sound of running feet as Emma bounded up the terrace steps, her ballet practice abandoned in favor of more interesting adult interactions. "Are you guys getting married?" she demanded without preamble, her perceptiveness once again catching them off guard. "Because Kayla at school says when grown-ups kiss like that, it means wedding bells." Jake and Eleanor exchanged amused glances, neither surprised by Emma's directness. "We're talking about making our family official," Jake explained carefully. "How would you feel about that?" Emma considered the question with the serious deliberation of a child who knows her opinion matters. "I think it's a good idea," she declared finally. "Eleanor already helps with my homework and makes Sunday pancakes and comes to all my recitals. She's basically already my bonus mom." "Bonus mom," Eleanor repeated, clearly touched by the designation. "That's what Ms. Patterson calls it. Because you're not trying to replace my real mom. You're just an extra mom. A bonus." Emma's logic was impeccable in its simplicity. "Plus, Dad smiles a lot more when you're around, and you laugh more here than you do at your office. I've been keeping track." Jake knelt to Emma's level, his heart overflowing with love for this perceptive, resilient child who had weathered so much change with grace beyond her years. "You're pretty smart, you know that?" "I know," Emma agreed matter-of-factly. "So when's the wedding? Can I wear my ballet shoes instead of regular shoes? And can we get a dog after? A real family should have a dog." Eleanor laughed, joining them at eye level. "And let's start with one big change at a time. First the house connection, then a wedding, then we can discuss the dog situation." Emma nodded, accepting this reasonable timeline. "I'm going to finish practicing now. Ms. Abernathy says consistency is the key to excellence." She hugged them both quickly before racing back down to the lawn, her energy inexhaustible. Jake and Eleanor rose together, watching as Emma resumed her ballet positions with renewed determination. The setting sun cast everything in golden light: the new home, the dancing child, the future stretching before them with possibilities neither had dared imagine a year earlier. "Captain Sterling would be proud of us," Eleanor said softly, her hand finding Jake's. "Of the family we're building, of the foundation work, of everything." "Sarah would be too," Jake added, the observation carrying no pain now, only peaceful certainty. She always said Emma deserved a village around her. They stood together in comfortable silence as twilight deepened around the estate. the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. Below, Emma continued dancing, her small figure silhouetted against the last light of day, a child secure in the knowledge of being deeply loved, both by the parents who had given her life and those who now guided her journey. From tragedy had come connection. From misunderstanding had come recognition. From ashes had come rebuilding. And from a single spark had grown the steady flame of family, a second chance for all of them, kindled in crisis but sustained by choice, by forgiveness, and by love that transcended all reasonable expectation. Second chance flames, Eleanor murmured, as if reading Jake's thoughts. The best kind, Jake agreed, drawing her close as their shared future unfolded before them, bright with promise and possibility.